Disclaimer: this video is a discussion of an online series which revolves pretty deeply around stories of child abuse and trauma. There are also mentions of animal abuse and suicide. If these are topics which are sensitive or triggering for you, I would recommend clicking off the video, as these are topics which I'm going to be talking about quite a bit. Thank you. Petscop is one of the most enigmatic YouTube series I've ever had the pleasure of watching. It is a series of 24 videos of gameplay of a mysterious PS1 game, which does not seem to exist anywhere outside of these recordings. At first, it might seem like a relatively simple premise, but the further the series goes on, and the further the main character gets sucked into the game, we seem to, in a way, follow them. As the series keeps hitting us with an avalanche of strange riddles and mysterious dialogue, which seem to be almost impossible to piece together.
Uh-oh.
Its creator, 𝕔𝕠𝕟𝕔𝕚𝕦𝕤𝕚, takes a relatively simple concept of a mysterious, lost game, and extends it into not only an amazingly creepy riddle, but also into what I would consider an abstract work of art, which gives you clear details of some events within it, but also takes full advantage of your imagination, and almost forces you to fill in the blanks.
That was an experience. Huh.
Its horror is almost entirely absent of jump scares, and is entirely based on the ominous atmosphere of the horrible events, which only become more clear and disturbing the more you think about them, the more you look into the riddles, leaving a much more long-lasting, but also rewarding impact. I also believe the design of the game is quite brilliant as well, to a point where I would say you could take almost any frame out of the game, and it would be somewhere in between somewhat off and eerie to terrifying. It has been pointed out before that the main character in the game doesn't fit into the bright world we first enter the game through at all, meaning not even those introductory scenes feel entirely right.
Paul's colour palette is drab and faded, and the enlarged eyes that most characters have, Paul's are tiny. It really shows what a juxtaposition Petscop originally was, with these bright and cheery environments, while your character is incredibly dreary by design. Paul seems to fit so much better in this underworld area.
It's an amazing series which I recommend you check out, and which you could probably talk about for hours, and still be left with lots of thoughts that were left unexplored. Which is kind of what has happened to me. And also, as you probably already noticed, this is a part 1, only covering the first 12 episodes. If the title hasn't already made it obvious, this is a part 2 of my Petscop examination. I'll put an annotation for part 1 in the corner, I'll link it in the description, and I would implore you, especially if you aren't yet aware of what Petscop is, to check that one out first. I talk about the first 12 episodes in it, and explain what Petscop is a little more in detail, talking about the story of Candace Newmaker, for example, which is something I hope I will never have to revisit again. 𝕔𝕠𝕟𝕔𝕚𝕦𝕤𝕚 himself has made the decision to stop referencing the Newmaker name or story in later episodes of the series, and I would like to do the same. Even if you already know about Petscop, I think some things in this video might be a little confusing if you don't know where exactly I'm coming from, so I would recommend you watch that one before coming here. With that said, I will be doing a little recapitulation of my previous thoughts on the series, because there are a few things which I didn't realize while making part 1, which I would like to also add, but I won't be going too far in depth. The series in its entirety is over 4 hours, and I simply can't boil all that happens in it into 5 minutes. Especially not if I have already watched it over 5 times, and I'm still not even sure what exactly has happened here. That said, I do have a conclusion for the series, but I would like to warn everyone that one of the best things about Petscop to me is that it doesn't give you all of the answers, and a lot of what you take from it depends on what you went into it to begin with. So please don't take my interpretation of it as the objective or final interpretation. It isn't. As far as the plot of the series goes, it revolves around our sweet main protagonist and the series narrator, Paul, finding an old PS1 game, which he decides to upload videos of to YouTube.
This is just to, prove to you that I'm not lying about this doom that I found.
It is clarified in episode 8 that he apparently got the game from his mother, who has had it since 2004.
Well, it could have changed between then and 2004. After 2004, my mom had it reportedly.
In the first 12 episodes, his commentary is always there, except for episodes 10, parts of episode 11, and episode 12. The episodes with his commentary begin dwindling in numbers more in the second half of the series. One interesting thing about Paul's commentary is that he always seems to be talking to a specific person.
When you come home next month, and hopefully you're feeling a little more enthusiastic about that now, we can investigate this together.
He never actually addresses the YouTube audience. He's always talking to someone in particular.
So if you're wondering what I'm doing right now, I have a drawing that I could scan and send to you.
Which does pose the question, why are these videos publicly available then? We will look into that. We also know there is somebody else controlling the channel now. Paul no longer owns it. As in the description of episode 11, it is said that Paul later passed ownership of the channel to us, but continued to record himself at our strong suggestion. Who actually is this us is a mystery which carries over from part 1 to here. One thing, which I think is oddly important, is that Paul has a habit of always collecting the little pieces that can be found throughout the game. It helps us better distinguish when the recording is Paul playing and when it's someone else, especially in episodes where Paul doesn't talk. I also just think it is a really neat small detail. It's kind of adorable, but besides Paul, there are other characters in the game we directly interact with. For example, Marvin.
I think you're confused, Marvin.
Marvin is a green-headed player who seems to be trapped in the game. This is something I've talked about quite a bit when talking about episode 12, and it should only become more relevant from here on out. Marvin first appears in episode 8, and is mentioned before that by a red tool, an object Paul can ask various questions, and it is able to answer some of them. In this scene, the tool turns pink and tells Paul to turn off the PlayStation because Marvin hurts it.
So that's not what it said before when I put in that question.
Marvin is overall a very strange individual. He moves faster than all the other characters. There are also quite a few messages in the game which seem to be addressed directly to Marvin. I believe this is because he has helped create it. And these messages tend to be pretty horrifying. While we're talking about the text boxes, I would also like to mention that whenever someone is marked speaking directly in the game, they are marked with a specific color. Paul and Kier are characters marked in yellow, Marvin is marked with green, his wife is marked blue, and Tiara, a character we'll get to in a little bit, is marked purple. It is also worth mentioning that Marvin is the father of Kier, a child we encounter at various points throughout the game. She isn't a player, she is instead a figure which can be caught, just like the pets in Even Care. There's overall a theme of the lines between pets and children being very blurry throughout the entirety of Petscop. It is set up from the very beginning with strange pet descriptions, and it never really goes away. Kier herself can be found in the game in 3 stages of distress: A, B, and NLM. There are a few signs pointing towards Marvin being responsible for Kier's state worsening. Interestingly enough, we don't actually know what happens to Kier. We know she's been the victim of abuse, but we don't really know how did she end up. Paul even claims he doesn't even remember meeting her or hearing about her at all in episode 11, even with her going missing.
Yeah, on that topic, I don't remember meeting this girl at all. I don't remember knowing her at any point. I just don't remember even hearing about anyone going missing.
Kier also seems to really resemble 2 people. There are some similarities between Kier and Candace Newmaker, which I have talked about earlier, though these are confirmed to be just references and have no real impact on the plot of the series. However, there are also many similarities between Paul and Kier. They're even born the exact same day.
And I remember you saying that we are, exactly the same age.
And then there is Tiara, or Belle. I'm never really sure. Tiara as another person seems to be trapped in the game. She's first seen in episode 2, where Paul walks into a mirror room, known as the Quitter's Room, where she is found on the opposite side of the mirror. We can also see things from her perspective in a demo recording from episode 12, where the game says she's been sitting on a chair for over 17 years. Based off the dialogue boxes in episode 12, her trapping seems to be the result of her failing a rebirth. I think Tiara might actually be my favorite character in the entire series out of purely personal reasons. The scenes in the Quitter's Room mean so much to me for reasons which were probably not intended at all. I believe Tiara represents a very good child. I say good in quotation marks. She's called smart by the tool and she's on the right side of the mirror in the Quitter's Room. And yet, her smile looks broken, as if there was something wrong with it. In spite of being called smart, she struggles with music, according to Marvin. In episode 12, she's also forced to mirror Paul's movements. To me, she represents a person who has been forced to reflect whatever is seen as ideal. Paul does seem to be the main character of the game in some ways. He is called the Newmaker and is told that he can turn care an element to care A and close some sort of a loop, meaning that Tiara is forced to imitate Paul to keep her good status. I said this before in part 1 and I'll say it again here. If you see me talking about something way too much, there is a good chance it's more about me than it is about the game. But it also is my genuine interpretation of the series. It's not like I'm knowingly forcing my own ideas onto it. I think my interpretation of Tiara does make sense in the context of the series. In fact, I'm basing a lot of my interpretation on the idea of her being a smart child with neglected needs. Or a smart child who is seen as good, and therefore does not need to be taken care of. So, with that said, this is the part where I've originally talked about the creator of the series last time, but I've already done that, so I think it's better we just jump straight ahead into the series this time. Episode 13 starts off with a demo sequence where Paul is pushing a bucket around the house. Demo sequences are usually footage the game plays itself when left unplayed for long enough, and they usually don't include any commentary. This demo recording, however, seems to be an exception, as Paul has quite a lot to say about what is going on. On the road in front of the house, there can be found a blue tool, which seems to run away from Paul when he tries to catch it.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, Paul has been on this road before, but he simply went off screen and tried to go this way. This could either be a different capture of the house where he can this time go here, or, alternatively, the game might be growing on its own, which honestly wouldn't surprise me. Paul tries to trap the tool within the bucket, and it works.
Oh.
There's also a cube on the road with a sign of Ronith's room on it, showing the two are connected. Ronith was seemingly also supposed to be caught with the bucket in even care. Seemingly quite surprised this actually works, Paul pushes the bucket back into the house, where a strange tune plays, the room goes dark, and Paul gains 15 collectibles.
What?
There doesn't seem to be much of an explanation given for this, and the footage just cuts over to Paul back in even care, in a new save file, where he is trying to catch Ronith with a bucket. He seems to be feeling some doubt about it.
And I'm feeling some doubt because this bucket seems way too small. But I should not have felt doubt. Just...
We then get to read Ronith's description. Ronith is Tonith's baby half-brother. Because he's younger, he gets to know from all of Tonith's mistakes. That's why he always looks both ways. He doesn't get into trouble. You won't have to watch him all the time. He's good.
Well, we finally got that.
Paul is understandably bewildered by this description. Whilst this one isn't very long, it still says a lot. We know Tonith got hit by a car, his lung is broken, and Ronith has seemingly had to witness that. I find it really impressive how far ahead Domenico has planned something like this. Up until now, Ronith's design was simply a bird that turns around. Since episode 1, it was a little detail which was just always there. And now it comes back, a year later, with a really disturbing explanation. Besides that, I also find it really interesting how the description talks about how you won't have to watch him all the time. He's good. We know pets are related to children in the game, and I think it says a lot that the game says a child who we have just been told has witnessed their brother get hit by a car simply pushes it aside to talk about how the child is a lot more careful and is good. It reminds me of Tiara in a lot of ways.
Last one.
The footage then cuts to Paul going up to Amber's cage, catching all of the pets in even care, it would seem. A text box pops up, which is a very tense moment. Congratulations. You caught every pet in even care, aside from Toneth, who isn't here yet. You have seen everything in the game, so far, but there will obviously be more. It's a growing organism. Your controller inputs will be useful, but your feedback will be even more useful. At 6 minutes 9 seconds, we can hear Paul tapping something out on the desk. I'm wondering if this could be the inputs or feedback given to the game through some sort of code. Please leave the PlayStation on when you leave. You can stand up now. Here, the subtitles give us a really big clue when saying, car door opens. I otherwise would not be sure whether this noise is regular door or car door. It kind of sounds like a car door, but I wouldn't really think of a car in the first place.
Why would I be playing Petscop in a car? The fuck?
Since the last episode is basically talking about Tiara getting trapped within the game, Paul could also be getting trapped. It would certainly seem so with the game telling him when to stand up. He could possibly be trying to escape this trapping by playing the game while driving. He talks about playing the game way too much in the following episode.
I'm playing this game too fucking much.
It is very interesting how much a little detail in the subtitles like this means. I feel like the first part of my examination has been a little more on the chaotic side, and it's all beginning to come together for me a lot more now. But it also feels like that is in a lot of ways because the series is beginning to piece itself together. Then again, it is also worth mentioning that, whilst we now know a car is involved in some way, I have very little idea on what could be used as proof as to how the car is actually involved in the game. Episode 14 is another one of the more lengthy episodes, with almost 30 minutes of runtime. It begins with a green screen of a demo sequence. After a few seconds, a room appears which looks like it is in the house. For the sake of simplicity, this is a room in the house which you haven't been able to access yet in front of the bathroom and calendars. It has 2 beds in it, as well as a windmill on the right, and something resembling a house on the left. The person playing walks up to the windmill. This windmill vanished off the face of the earth. Here's a similar puzzle. For you, Marvin. There are 2 pictures of a door. In the first picture, the door is closed. In the second picture, taken later, the door is open. Nobody opened the door. The door did not open itself. The door, in fact, did not open at all. What happened? So we know this is Marvin playing. After the text plays, he starts chaotically running around a little bit before the footage cuts to Paul.
I can't just wait.
Before we move over to that, I would like to bring up that I believe Marvin and Rainer have worked on this game together, trading it back and forth, Rainer being the main creator, and Marvin being more of a playtester. I will elaborate more on that later, but signs like this, as well as a sign from episode 11 where Rainer said he started the game for Marvin, say pretty clearly Marvin was involved in its creation. It's just the question of how much was he really involved, and in what exact ways.
Thankfully I have been suddenly inspired by an idea that is, in a way, similar to the idea that brought me to this house.
Paul here is talking about some sort of an idea of what brought him to the house. Unfortunately, I'm still not sure what exactly that idea is.
Because that idea involved pretending something was there that wasn't there.
Paul then tries to walk up to the door, pretending the door is open.
And this idea involves pretending that this door, right here, this one, is open rather than closed. You can see that it's closed, but...
The footage quite elegantly cuts the footage of a demo recording where the door is in fact open.
And if I were to pass through this doorway, what would happen? Would I bump into a door? No, because the door is open, right? I would just keep going into the room that's there. And I happen to know I'm going to walk into the room right now. I'm in the room. I happen to know what this room looks like because I saw it in a demo recording just today.
While Paul walks around in it, he rambles for a bit about the family YouTube.
And you can see it too. I assume it will be up on the family YouTube along with this video that I'm recording right now.
This is something that's pretty important. The family YouTube and the public YouTube are most likely the same channel, just with some videos being kept private and only being seen by the family. Still, the question is, why would somebody store the recordings? Well, it is pretty clear somebody wants to control Paul and see what he does in the game. But who? This might have something to do with the person from episode 8, whom he talks to, who knew quite a bit about what has happened with the game before.
Can you remember when you saw this? Well, it could have changed between then and 2004. After 2004, my mom had it reportedly.
My main guess as to why some of these recordings are kept public is that the family also wants to show them to people outside of the family, but still wants to keep most of them for themselves. It would also seem that they are very careful with what they let people outside of the family see.
Shit. No, I fucking just forgot to start the recording. They won't like that.
Paul talks about how there is a windmill on the right, because that's what we've seen in the Marvin recording, but here, there isn't a windmill. Instead, there is something that has been censored.
On the right side there's a windmill, on the left side there is something that Marvin does not bother to look at, but we will be looking at.
He then tries to go to the house-like object on the left. The footage fades to him running around the house, seemingly aimlessly while he gets to it.
I'm on the thing that I got blocked by the beds, and if I go up, just keep going up, there will be a question mark that appears that will let me go and do something. And if I press X, something will happen.
Whilst he can see what exactly is going on in both places, Paul clearly has to play a bit of a guessing game, pushing random buttons and just trying to see what happens.
What will happen? I think possibly a text box will open, because that's what happens with the windmill, right? I pressed X, and a text box appeared with text in it that is probably cryptic, and we don't really care too much about, so we're gonna press X a bunch of times to get through all the text. But we can look at it later.
What we see is a screen filled with framed discs, all of them seemingly looking the same, always tilted slightly differently. Paul picks one of them, the game zooms in on it, with a horrifying synth lick playing.
A bunch of times.
After skipping the text boxes, Paul begins pushing buttons completely at random, just seeing what he can do.
Or it's not a text box, and it could be literally anything else in the world. That happens when you press X. So the next thing I can think to do is just press buttons randomly and chaotically, and hopefully we'll see some results. So I'm doing that right now. I don't know if you can hear that.
The discs spin around. He opens a few of them.
I'm thinking I'm being really productive right now. I think I'm definitely being really productive. It's just that we can't really see it.
We can see Paul in the bathroom talking about his productivity and humming what the subtitles describe as Care's melody. The song that he tried to play at the end of episode 11. So we now know Marvin was definitely referring to Care in that clip, talking about how she tripped and fell. Paul then says,
I'm playing this game too fucking much.
Before the footage cuts.
And so, the windmill isn't there. I think I can, so I get blocked by I do get blocked by the beds.
Paul is now going through the demo footage. The windmill still doesn't appear to be there.
So I've actually seen recordings that it made of me from a year ago. And I had not seen that, recording in the time between, so it was holding on to this thing, and it only decided a year later to play back.
This really makes me consider how massive the footage vault of Petscop is, just how much it can store within itself. We now know why the last episode has the demo sign within it.
I lost the video. I lost it. I had the audio. Okay, so here's the thing. Those demo recordings can be different, right? They can be different from when I was playing. So when I caught all of those pets and it showed the text, that was different from what it showed when I was playing. It showed something, it happened to line up, right, perfectly, the same number of text boxes and so forth, and also the music wasn't there in the demo. There can be differences, and this was part of what made it seem reasonable that the door could be open.
This is quite interesting. What did that sign originally say? I guess we'll never know, but it is very fascinating that it said, "You can stand up now," even though that's presumably not what Paul has seen. Does that mean the game is controlling Paul without his knowledge? It would certainly explain those demo recordings, which do not have his commentary, but look like they would have to have a real player playing them. Perhaps Paul can only control that character when he gets really immersed in the game. This sounds like a stretch, but I feel like it really is the main, possibly the only explanation for those recordings, which only become more and more present as the series goes on. It would also make sense, considering I play this game way too fucking much. I also think this is most likely a stretch, but it is worth mentioning that "you can stand up now" is 5 words. Paul is going through the discs again, talking about how the triangle might be back.
Right, so I'm assuming that triangle is back, but it could be square or circle. I'm gonna just do all of them.
I'm assuming this is a spinning pyramid from episode 9, but I can't be sure.
Okay. I can actually, I think I can rotate.
Going through the CDs, they all seem identical, but I actually have an idea of what these might be. Considering this is the house Rainer worked on Petscop, these could very well be CDs of either demo versions of it, or, if you want to be a bit more daring, they could be CDs which store people within the game on them. They could also be CDs which interact with the family in some way, perhaps with all of the different details that different family members see, or with their rooms. This, however, is only a vague theory. I'm mostly struggling to explain the discs. Paul seems to be getting a bit confused at this point. He chuckles as the footage cuts.
So, I mean, I could have gone just totally off the rails by this point. I could be anywhere.
He's walking around the house again, walking along a door in a wall which he can't enter.
So, attempt 5 was this room over here. And now, attempt 6, we're going to try to push the bucket.
He talks about how this is his 6th attempt doing this. I do love the analytic and somewhat scientific approach Paul often takes in the game. He's not just a protagonist from whom things work, he genuinely comes across as someone who's trying their best to figure everything out. He then tries to push the bucket into the room, presumably with the tool still in it. He leaves it there, but it doesn't do anything.
This. Okay. So now this way.
The footage cuts again to Paul saying,
Trying again. This is attempt 22.
This illustrates the concept of Paul really getting dragged into the game, but also that he really is trying to figure this out.
Right, now we don't have to worry about that.
He walks up to the censored object, counting.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I find it funny that even here, when he can't even see what's going on, Paul is still collecting those little items. He walks over to the corner, and the bucket just teleports there.
5, 6. Okay.
A few sounds of a bucket emptying play while a brush goes over the wall. The censored box disappears as the wall gets painted over. A key also comes out of the bucket, now floating over Paul's head.
Okay, hopefully we got it.
Now before we go any further, Let's talk a bit about everything that just happened. This is most likely the painting puzzle in Tona's description, written by Marvin, where he also says he has already hung a dog on the wall. That sounds like something that would have to be censored. A dead animal, possibly a bird. This also might begin to make more sense later, but I'm already beginning to believe that we are living through Rainer's memory here, of when he was working on the game. He helped Marvin's wife paint the walls, and she allowed him to live in the garage, which is why he got the key. Paul then walks over to the garage door in the actual recording, not in the demo, and begins entering the garage. The door opens before fading to black and playing a haunting choir, which we've heard before in episode 9 when entering Even Care again. Paul finally speaks up, reassuring us he is still there. He starts up the game, and there are 2 empty game slots and 1 file named Strange Situation.
It deleted my files.
This feels almost cheeky after all of those terrifying house experiences, but still. The game seems to have deleted 2 of his 3 save files, clearly inviting him to reopen the one he still has, which he does.
This.
He is this time standing in front of the house, where a birthday party of some kind seems to be happening. There are signs of a cake and a girl, Care A. This also reminds me of a description in episode 11, people looking for the A versions of children, instead of just looking for the children. Paul is once again going from one side to the other, but he can no longer go to the tool, only to the house. I'm assuming this is also a different capture of the house, as has been captured 3 times. There is a subtle widescreen flash as we enter the house. Inside, a birthday party seems to be going on, with a cake on the table, with Paul's character even having a little party hat and a balloon. Even with something that sounds like birthday music in the background. Though, because we are on Petscop, it sounds cheerful, yet terrifying. I really hate the music here. I think it suits what is going on, but it's also so ominous, with the way a single cheering tone plays, then fades into the background, and then, when you're really not expecting it, it just comes right back, even louder than before. I know I've talked about how the school experiences in the game could represent the experiences of a mentally disabled or traumatized child, and I think this could be similar to that, showing how Kiara sees the house with everything she's had to go through. The noise of what is going on around her is supposed to sound cheerful, but it just gets warped. The text box appears as we enter the house, marked in blue. You made it. Happy birthday. Why are you covering your face? Oh, this seems to be Marvin's wife speaking, probably bewildered by an answer she doesn't know how to respond to. We interact with a cake, and it says, "Of course I recognize you. Those eyes, that nose, that's still you." Random intervention while I'm recording. I would like to apologize to everyone in case you're hearing, some howling. It's my neighbor's dog. And trust me, I am just as annoyed as you are. I hope the background music just managed to block it out. Because I'm not re-recording this. I'm already like an hour into the recording. My voice is dying. Interacting with a cake in front of Kara's room, another text box pops up. Go ahead and have a slice. Oh, don't worry about those. There seem to be sketches of the tool underneath the cake, which I'm guessing is a nod to Rainer living in the house, having sketches for Petscop all over the place. It's clearly something he's very dedicated to. This also reminds me of how Paul talked about meeting Rainer in episode 11 once.
I saw him at a birthday party once. Only we're down in the basement playing video games. Hide from everyone.
Paul checks one of the calendars, which now ends at November 12th, with a birthday cake on it. Most dates up until then were marked in green, where Care seemingly has been with Marvin. I believe this is a calendar showing dates of his shared custody of Care. Paul goes off the calendar, and a text box appears. I sure hope you've realized by now. It doesn't matter how long you've been gone. It doesn't matter how much you've changed. You aren't lost. Stop wandering and come home. This message feels oddly threatening, as if it was demanded of Care to just be okay, in spite of the fact that she clearly isn't. The red calendar is blank.
Check something.
Paul quickly talks about having to check something, and the footage cuts to show Paul talking about what year this might be.
So what I'm thinking is that this is either 1995 or it's 2017.
Paul seems to once again be talking about a strong resemblance between him and Care, with them being the exact same age, meaning this could be his birthday as well. It seems a bit odd that somebody would treat him the same way as Care, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. The room we are going into through the demo recordings last time is open now. Paul enters, and he bumps into something. Probably the closed door from before. Care, are you okay? You ran straight to the door. Did you think it was open? Oh, poor baby. Paul walks around the place a bit, but there is nothing besides both of the beds, with no windmill and no censored object. The bedside table seems to still be interactable. Paul interacts with it as the room goes dark, and a synth plays again. The discs are still there, though you can barely see them. I've actually had to adjust the screen for them to be clearly visible. The screen stays black for a little while, before the discs disappear, and a dark, ominous tune starts playing as text boxes pop up. Where's the disc? Where are the discovery pages? This seems to be Paul talking, marked in yellow, just like here. What are you talking about? What disc? Discovery pages? This seems to be Marvin's wife talking to Paul, most likely trying to deny the existence of the discs he's looking for. Jill, stop fucking ignoring me. Get in here and show me where that disc is. Paul is clearly panicking at this point. Jill, no, Care. This is Mommy. This is your mommy. Sweetie, I'm right here in front of you. There is no one else here. What are you looking at? What's over there? Care, can't you hear me? Can't you see me waving? Snap out of it. Care, where are you going? The text box ends there. Paul drops his controller, clearly scared and shocked. He stands there for a bit before the footage cuts, to a moment where he's still standing there, this time giving us a little more insight on what is going on.
I think that was based off of a conversation that I had last year on my birthday.
This seems to have been a capture from 2017, but the house was already captured 3 times back then. How does new text get added into the game? This was clearly not text which Raynor typed in.
Game froze.
The game crashes as Paul attempts to leave the room.
I have to call Jill.
It cuts there. So we have quite a lot to say about this. We have a new character in the game, Jill. I know I've alluded to her being Kira's mother, but I actually don't think this is the case. I'm not sure why the color coding is like this, but I firmly believe Jill is Marvin's sister. There's more evidence for this later on. Kira's mother is actually called Anna, I think the two might actually be overlapping here in some way. Besides that, this admittedly was not the most intense scene emotionally when I first saw it. Petscop is one of the rare examples of a series where things begin to impact you a lot only once you figure them out, and once you know them. They only get more intense as it all begins piecing itself together. The entire dark backstory Tony Domenico seemingly had in mind. I know this scene nearly made me tear up at one point. It would seem that Paul's dialogue is either getting glitched or connected to some other, already recorded scene. I don't believe Jill would try and act like Paul was Care all of a sudden. Considering there is a strong resemblance though, the game could be glitching out and putting Paul in places where he's not supposed to be. I'm trying to think of how Paul and Care could be even closer. Perhaps they're unknown siblings somehow, but Paul says he doesn't even remember meeting her.
I don't remember meeting this girl at all. I don't remember knowing her.
Could they even be the same person? I'm certainly not counting that out. Either way, what is depicted here is a girl, Care, getting home on her birthday, going through some form of an episode. Since the calendar up until November 10th was marked green, I think Marvinus kidnapped Care in that time. I don't believe it's realistic to have shared custody where he just takes her away for weeks. Somehow, she came back on her birthday, but as the recording of a frozen house shows, she wasn't greeted with concern. Care was greeted with ignorance and an expectation to just act like everything is fine. Her mother trying to act like she's there for her is going to fall on deaf ears because she cannot feel safe after what Marvin put her through. So no matter how much love she tries to give Care, it can't work without acknowledging what she's been through. The footage cuts back to Paul talking, getting cut off. You can hear him tapping on glass and saying he feels trapped. This could be him trapped in this car, if he still is in the car, or maybe he could be in his house. I'm honestly not sure, but the tapping on glass sounds like the type of thing you could do in a car more so than in a house. He hesitantly starts the game up again, trying to explain away how the game could have just used him as a part of it.
So through Google, I asked the internet, how might one rewrite to a CDR? And the internet's response to that question was, "You idiot."
He enters the house again. It looks the same, with the exact same text boxes. This time, Paul tries to enter the garage.
Some things you can't rewrite.
There is just darkness and a computer in the middle of it.
So I'm in the garage now. Oh.
Paul is fascinated by what he's seeing. It seems to be Rayner's computer, with the pages about Petscop and the Petscop discovery pages, the one he was asking Jill about before. This also seems to be the same website that was being referred to all the way back in episode 1, where this all started.
This is the website. For some reason, it's in the game on a computer screen.
Also, I'm not sure if this means anything, but the computer seems to be made by a company called 𝕔𝕠𝕟𝕟, which is interesting considering this is also a company that doesn't exist. I've tried to look up what a Tarna could be, but I didn't get many results. All I found is something about Hinduism, and that is a very big stretch to connect, I believe. Though I am not going to go deeper into this, but I did just realize that Hinduism does connect to reincarnation. Maybe there is a connection there, but I can't make it.
And this is the Your Child page. Judging by all the text. Wish I could read it.
It is a bit odd to me that Paul somehow recognizes the various pages of the website, since he most likely never saw it before.
Jesus. And this is a different page. I have no idea what's going on anymore.
Paul then leaves the PC and decides to enter the room with the beds. He enters the room and it immediately goes dark, with a censored text box appearing at the bottom of the screen.
Fuck.
At Episode 15 is now one of the demo sequences with a character that seems to be played by Paul, but has no commentary over it. It shows him walking to the school with ominous music playing. He walks up a staircase and he can hear a little tune playing in the background. He is simply walking by when he gets hit by something and gets pushed in front of a picture of a girl with spinning letters in front of it. Paul tries to walk into the picture with no success. He tries to walk away, but he keeps getting pushed in front of the picture until he decides to go the other direction, finding a hole in the wall, through which he enters a classroom with Marvin in it. He enters the room from behind the chalkboard. I'm really not sure why. The controller in game language is once again reintroduced, with Paul simply saying, "Not in table." Marvin says, "Sit here for present." He then goes behind the chalkboard, while Paul sits on the table. A victorious tune plays as Marvin comes out from behind the chalkboard with Tiara. This is Belle. Just like with calling Paul Pal, he seems to be misspelling Belle's name as well. This to me feels like a similar feature to Paul not being able to open doors. Marvin then leaves, letting Tiara continue on with the conversation. "I am Tiara, not Belle." After a moment of silence, she continues, "Press Nifty." "What Nifty?" Paul asks. "No, Player 1. Press Nifty." I find it interesting Paul is referred to as Player 1 here, as if he is some sort of a hidden main character in the game. There is a little moment of silence, most likely of Paul trying to figure out what Nifty is. After a little while, he figures it out, opening a square of textures within the school. A little pen drifts onto the screen, making high-pitched scribbling noises, drawing pink lines. Paul can scroll further down through the textures. He decides to draw a high on the chalkboard. As he leaves the Nifty, a playful tune plays. The chalkboard now has a high on it, and the walls are covered in scribbles. The episode ends there. A few notes before we move on to episode 16. I think Paul is some sort of a main character here, since he is the Player 1, and it almost feels like Tiara is trying to teach him something, helping him prepare. This almost feels like a very conventional movie scene, just put in the most cryptic, uncanny way imaginable. The color on the Nifty also reminds me of something. It looks like the exact same color from episode 5, where the tool turned pink, and began talking about Marvin hurting it.
What the fuck?
This is most likely Tiara speaking. It would also make sense considering the sign in the Quitter's room in episode 7, in that same color. It would also explain why it took so long for the tool to respond back then. This clearly isn't the most efficient way of typing. I'm still trying to think of a way Paul could control his character in these demo recordings. Probably the most far-fetched explanation I could think of was just him dreaming this, or controlling the game in his sleep. On the other hand, if we want to be really realistic with it, he could just be forced to make these recordings and be in a state where he's not able to turn on the microphone. Which when you think about it is not that different from sleeping. Episode 16 is a bit of a breather. It's quite short, not even 3 minutes long. It also came out on Halloween. I'm not sure if this is in some way important or if it's just some kind of odd inside joke. It is also one of the more unusual episodes. It starts with a dark ambience playing in the background, in the garage of the house, with the only light in the room being the computer screen. The background noise of the episode kind of sounds like cars, but not even the subtitles say what it really is. Suddenly, a screen appears with text over the game, and starts making a really loud buzzing noise. When I say really loud, I mean really loud, by the way. I toned it down here, but beware, it's loud. The sign itself reads, "No controller input has been detected for a very long time. Family, neighbors, police, or whoever, keep game console running. Call provided phone number." What seems to be the phone number here has been censored over, which is probably the most easy to figure out censor in the entire game. The buzzing continues for a little while, with the screen occasionally fading in and turning orange. Then, a screen with a room appears, which is called the burn-in monitor, ghost room / testing room. This is not very visible, but there does seem to be some box with an orange entrance behind this screen. There also seems to be a square in the corner, next to what appears to be a computer, with what I believe to be a recording of Paul's current position in Petscop. It is very small, but the more I look at it, it very much resembles the living room in the house. This seems to be Paul's room. The main thing which leads me to believe this is something that I should have most likely mentioned before. In episode 11, there is a black screen with a hidden image inside of it, and this image has a very clear picture of a piano in it. This shows that the game was most likely already seeing and watching Paul's room at the time, since against the right wall, there is an object I can only imagine being a piano. The dot on the bed clicks for a little while, before the screen then switches back to the sign, with more loud buzzing. Afterwards, it switches to the burn-in monitor again, with more clicking on the dot. The footage cuts as the dot begins moving, getting closer to the PC and sitting down on the chair before the episode ends. I think this means that Paul is going to do the same thing as Tiara. The dot is him. The game seems to be monitoring him and trying to get him to play it as much as possible. His room is seemingly getting burnt in. The game somehow knows his room. Since he has already talked about finding his room, there is a chance that it's already there, but I have a hard time believing the game could predict what Paul's room would look like years down the line. This is also pretty confusing when it comes to my car theory, as this clearly isn't a car, so to think Paul is playing from his car might be a bit of a stretch. Still, it's not that simple, as we'll find out in the following episodes. Episode 17 is a seamless continuation of episode 16, starting in that same garage, with the music and everything else. Interestingly enough, it was uploaded months after episode 16. It starts with Paul going into the menu. The sign there now reads, "The ghost room is a ship in a bottle." Before I get into anything, let's talk about this. We just saw the ghost room in episode 16, but it's quite confusing as to what it means. Unfortunately, I don't think this description is nearly as helpful as it could be. A ship in a bottle is a sculpture of a ship built from the outside, where you have to carefully add little bits in, trying to recreate the world outside of the bottle. I believe that is similar to what is happening here, with the game taking in bits of the outer world, like the house or Paul's room. I've tried to look for alternative meanings of the expression ship in a bottle, but wasn't really able to find anything conclusive outside of maybe a few Urban Dictionary explanations. Onto the episode itself, Paul goes into the options, where he finds something called the sound test, where he can test out the various sound effects. Most of them are quite uninteresting, some of them were just marked with question marks, still showing that the game appears to be in some ways unfinished. Or perhaps these could be the names the game gives sound effects which it records from the outer world. There are, however, a few cry sound effects for all of the pets. Are these sounds meant to be the sounds they make when they get caught? Are they crying? There's also a sound effect called Rand is thirsty and Rand is very thirsty. These are somewhat subtle, but they're still very dark when you really read into it. We go by more sound effects, called Calendar 1997 and Calendar 2000. There's also one called Your Calendar, which is pretty interesting. We keep going by a bunch of question marks before ending up on two effects, named Care says uh-oh and Care says bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Uh-oh.
Paul presses both of these sound effects before spamming the bye-bye sound effect endlessly,
Bye.
then pressing uh-oh once.
Uh-oh.
The ball on screen turns orange, and we enter a secret menu. This appears to be a cheat code, similar to the one we have used at the start of the game. How did Paul know this one, though, stays a mystery to me. Perhaps he managed to get it from Jill? This perhaps doesn't seem as that much of a big deal in this video, since I'm talking all of the time, but we haven't heard from Paul since the fuck at the end of episode 14. There's a good chance he's now trapped within the game, or maybe trapped somewhere else even. I believe Jill is Marvin's sister. Perhaps she's trying to use Paul in some way to either bring her brother back, or help him finish whatever plans he may have had before getting trapped himself. Back to the secret game menu. We can hear some ominous music and see 3 options in front of us. All recordings, room impulses, and extra stuff. We go into the room impulses, where you can see various places throughout the game, from the gift plane to the grave. One quite interesting place is Anna's office, which seems to be the office of Kara's mom. I'm trying to think of a way to connect this with the things we saw there at the very start of the game. The paper about Kara's various states, as well as the phone call talking about how Kara left the room. This feels like a really tiny bit of her life we have experienced. This also reminds me that that sign of Kara leaving the room is the exact same one we saw in episode 11, where Marvin kidnapped Kara.
What? Uh-oh.
I believe that was the memory of when she got the call, or the warning, that Kara's left the room. She probably set up some sort of a device to make sure Kara doesn't leave. Out of all the places, Paul picks the house, picks the generation in which he wants to see it, 10, and he starts it up. We can once again see the white flash from earlier, before appearing in the house. Surprisingly enough, it actually has pretty calming music this time around, and also has a bunch of Cheeto heads running around, fading in and out of existence. We seem to be able to pick which one of them do we want to play as with the wheel in the corner. We can always make all of the other ones disappear, and appear as the default character in the house. We know the Cheetos are Paul's character, from other people's view, and this shows that the game has recordings of just about all of his gameplay. It is a bit of an uneasy feeling, to be honest. Paul decides to test out the switching a bit, which also feels really strange, with no commentary to go over it. He does not enter the room from episode 14, most likely intentionally. After a little while, he leaves the house, with more figures running around there. The house is still looking like a birthday party is going on in there, with a sign showing Kara A and a cake. Suddenly, the music stops, and a text box appears on the left side of the screen. Hi there. Wake up. You're free. There you go. Thank you. I want you to retrace your steps. Here, Paul seemingly gets forced to walk backwards, walking back in a pattern. The family, as usual, wants to learn what happened to you between November 10th and November 12th of 1997. On November 10th of 1997, you ran away from your daddy's school building, and on the 12th, you arrived at your house. The question is, where were you on November 11th, and what were you doing there? I hope to guide you to that location with a spell, which I will begin now. You are a girl named Carrie Mark. You were born on November 12th, 1992. You have a mommy named Anna, a daddy named Marvin, an auntie named Jill, an uncle named Thomas, a cousin named Daniel. The text here turns colorless again. I know what you must be thinking. Have these statements always been true? Or have I cursed you? Is there such a thing? A curse that changes your past? Stop thinking. The text turns yellow again. You were kidnapped and spent 5 months studying in an abandoned elementary school. You ran away, crying, ashamed, covering your face. You were blind. At some point, your movements stopped making sense. Bumping into walls and doors, dodging invisible obstacles. Find the moment. When were you led astray on the road? The spell here seemingly stops, letting Paul move around a bit more freely. A girl went missing here, the text box says. Story goes, your daddy used to sit on a bench with a birthday cake, trying to lure her home. Instead of missing girl signs, he put up birthday girl signs, promising cake to the birthday girl. Of course, the birthday girl never came home, to his disappointment. When I learned about this absurd story, I spent a lot of time digging. Eventually, I found out what really happened to that girl. Want to know? Ask. Paul stands there for a bit, before running around, the same way as in episode 11, making a text box pop up. What happened to her? An object begins emerging from the ground, looking quite similar to a gift with a face on it. We actually haven't seen the face system for a while now, but I think we've actually seen this face before. We've seen it in episode 9, to be more specific. Lena Leshkovitz, 1968 to 1977. They didn't see her. We finally found the gravestone of the girl and the windmill who both disappeared, as said in the text box all the way back in episode 9. I'm still not sure what Marvin did, because whilst killing the child sounds like something he might very well do, I can't imagine what he would do with the windmill. It is also quite strange, because he clearly tried to get her back. Is this a sign of Marvin being mentally unstable? Or is it perhaps him trying to fool the world around him into believing he didn't do anything? It's also quite strange to try to lure the child back. Just the wording on that feels off. And also, if he killed her, how did his wife, and Lena's sister, just brush that off? We know she took pictures of him, both with and without the windmill. Last thing worth noting, this is clearly Rainer speaking. I'm wondering who is it for, and how did Paul know where to go to find this message? Because it seems oddly specific. Perhaps it is something he has gone through before, and is just trying to find a recording of now. Afterwards, the footage cuts to Paul still going backwards, finding the door going underground, going all the way to the road of the car, seemingly trying to get hit. This could be a reference to how they didn't see her. We still don't know who didn't see her, however. Paul runs off on the road before disappearing in the distance. This episode makes me consider a lot of things, which I don't think I have a lot of proof for. First things first, we now know the names of a lot of the family members, and their places in the family. Anna is Kier's mom, Marvin is her dad, his sister, and Kier's aunt is Jill. I'm assuming Jill also has children, since Lena obviously couldn't have children, and a cousin is mentioned in the text boxes. I'm assuming Rainer's name isn't actually Rainer, but that he is Daniel, and that Michael is his brother and also Jill's other child. Another thing which I'm considering here is, how exactly does this whole spell thing work? Does Paul actually become Kier here? And if so, what exactly is all this supposed to mean? Is he perhaps being controlled by an old recording of Kier playing the game? Or maybe this is a capture of reality? Actually, we know the in-game date of the birthday house is November 12th, so I believe this is the day where Kier found Lena's grave after running away from the school, before coming back to the house, which is what the episode ends on. Then again, we know the road she's on doesn't lead to a house. It leads to the school. Hello, it's future me again. This is something that somehow did not hit me earlier, which I'm honestly surprised by, but obviously Kier is still retracing her steps here, meaning she's headed back to the school where she originally started. So any sort of theorizing about why she's going back into the school pretty much makes no sense. Apart from that, we also can't go on without talking about the horrifying descriptions of what happened here. Kier was kidnapped for 5 months by Marvin before getting lost whilst trying to get back home. There is also Lena, whom is yet another dead child in the game, this one only 9 years old. I'm still wondering who didn't see her. Did she get hit by a car? That does sound like the implication, though it could be many other things too. Or, there is also a possibility that Lena is not in fact dead, but instead that she did something to upset Marvin enough to stop seeing her, and basically trying to get rid of her. If Lena were to actually be still alive, it would also be very interesting to look at the sign in front of the house, which depicts Kier A, but which seemingly also depicts how it looked when Marvin was trying to lure Lena back. There is a plot line here which seems to make a scary amount of sense to me, which is that Marvin wants to bring Lena back, and he sees her in Kier A, which is why he acts so psychotic when Kier is unable to fulfill that need. Episode 18 is Paul going through more of the secret menu, this time going through extra stuff. This mostly seems to be pictures of various characters and various stages of development in the game. The first thing we see is the Guardian, or the default character. This is most likely a massive stretch, however I do find it worth acknowledging that Guardian could be another word for parent, which could be related to the game in some way. It is also worth noting that one of the iterations is the one we see at the school when we get hit, and it does kind of look like the Guardian crying. It is interesting to see the development stages of the various characters here, for example of Toneth, whose leg wasn't broken at the start. Pen seemed to have some legs before too, but is just floating now. I also just now noticed that she is holding the bell from the sound test, or at least what seemed to be a simplified version of it. But this is another nod to Pen being related to music, in spite of the fact that we've been told she is completely deaf. We also see a pet called Hudson, which we've never seen in the game. I'm not sure why. Perhaps this means something, perhaps it is just Tony showing us some very slight behind the scenes footage. We also see the gift plane map, which clearly has a lot more in it than just Even Care. Assuming Even Care is the pink square on the map, there's clearly meant to be a lot more there too. But we sort of knew that already. The last thing we see in the menu is a simplistic model of the house, which very slowly zooms in as we look at it. The music stops, and if we listen closely, for a little bit we can hear a short cut of Care saying something. It sounds like Eri. Possibly a part of the name Carrie? I'm not sure what would it be good for even if we assumed she was saying Carrie though. Nothing else happens, while we stare at the house for a bit longer. Episode 19 is Paul going in further through the secret menu, going through the recordings, where you can see a bunch of spinning console icons. The file names here are mostly marked with randomly generated groups of letters, but some of them are still quite interesting. For example, the one called Family 3. In the files themselves, you can choose the generation, which presumably lets you choose in which generation of the game do you want the recording to play. There's also a button called Demo Rot. I'm not sure what the rot could be a shortener for. I'm thinking this might have something to do with whether we want the recording to show that it is a demo recording above it or not. This is one of those more stretchy theories, but I feel like Paul finally gaining access to this part of the game might have something to do with him getting sucked into it. And it might be that before this, Marvin was the one in control of all of the demo recordings the game was showing him. Paul scrolls past a bunch of the recordings. At Generation 7 their icons change from consoles to CD discs, which is pretty interesting. Not even so because of the game's changing form, but because these discs look exactly like the ones in the house. I think this plays well to the idea of those discs being trapped people, or something of the sort. Scrolling past the autosaves, the randomly generated recordings are intertwined with some pretty interestingly titled recordings, such as Fuck Fuck Fuck, Family 2, and Tiara. Perhaps I would be wishing for too much here, but I really wonder whether Domenico made all of these recordings, or if they are just there as props. It is also interesting that Tiara's name is written here as Tiara, instead of her getting called Belle inside of the game. Paul goes all the way back to Generation 1 recordings, with many interesting file names, with lots of different names, presumably of all the children playing the game, as well as Marvin. Surprisingly enough, there is no file here named Paul. I won't read out all of the names. Here's a list of all of them in case you are interested. I'll just talk about the ones who are more interesting. I think the various children's names having a number in front of them, like Nathan 2 or Belle 4, mean these are save files of children who have played before, and are now playing after the game's generation has changed. Belle also has a lot of saves here. She has clearly been playing the game a lot more than almost everyone else, with the exception of Mike, whom we have already known has been testing the game out with Raynor. It is also interesting that Amber is the name of one of the children, but Amber is also the name of a pet in Even Care. Could it be possible that there are children trapped in the game as pets, but not as players? Paul then gets all the way back to the very first save of the game, called Sword Test. He loads it up. Before it starts up, the text in the main menu now reads, "Everything is a trick." The recording has its generation and name marked up in the upper left corner. The recording itself is just the Guardian, not even its final form, floating around through the various textures in the game, seemingly testing out whether the various textures are the proper height for the character to walk on them or through them. They don't stop it, however. These are a lot of the textures we see in Even Care. There are no textures of what is underneath the Newmaker plane. The footage then cuts to another recording, this time labeled Mic 2. A colorful loading screen appears in front of our eyes, before we appear in a room with a canvas, which later seemingly went on to become the room connecting Pen and Wavy's rooms. For a bit, Mike simply floats around, clipping through the walls, with the camera not panning at all. He goes into Wavy and Randus's room. They're not there yet. What is there, however, is an egg, which floats right into the screen once the Guardian touches it. A text box appears, quietly. Clearly sound effects for the game are not yet made here. What? One of the eggs was in Daniel's game? What an unfair trick. Have you found every egg in the office? So we now definitely know Daniel is Rainer. It is his game after all. This actually took me a little while to figure out, purely because Easter egg hunts aren't a thing where I live. But this is obviously some sort of an Easter egg hunt, and it would seem Rainer has decided to hide an egg for Mike within his game. It is perhaps now as good of a time as ever to know that this episode's description reads, "Some select Petscop recordings." In a way, recordings have the power to raise the dead. They're kind of scary. We finished our long Easter egg hunt. I'm not sure what exactly this could mean. This Easter egg hunt presumably happened 2 decades ago. At least the part about raising the dead makes sense, considering Mike's death. The footage cuts to Care in Generation 3. The game now has music, though it still is a bit unfinished. Care is just running around, aimlessly and carelessly it would seem, probably just trying to dance to the game jingle. It feels almost scary how innocent this entire situation is. The game then cuts to Belle in the exact same scenario. This feels like the series trying to give us a comparison here. We know Belle, Tiara, is a very smart child. She figures the Randus puzzle out almost immediately. However, what this also feels like to me is Marvin letting Care try out the game first, presumably, because she is his child. Then he gives it to Tiara, whom does way better than everyone else. This very much feels like a moment at which Marvin came up with a plan to rebirth Tiara as his child. We then, for the first time in these 19 episodes, see Randus' description. Randus is a flower. He does need water, but not as much as he thinks. You shouldn't worry. If you are considering Randus, you should adopt Wavy as well. Wavy knows how to trick Randus. In Wavy's description, Wavy is a cloud. He is afraid of everything. He is especially afraid of freezing. According to him, he's never the same person for more than a few seconds. This is very interesting. Even in earlier generations of the game, these themes of trickery and disturbing undertones were sort of present. I think Randus' description is similar to Ronith's, when it said, "You won't have to look after him." It is essentially ignoring Randus' needs, or possibly paranoias, in case he really doesn't need that much water. Wavy's description mostly feels like a reference to him being a cloud, as clouds always change. But it could also be a reference to some sort of a mental disorder where his personality changes all the time. The footage then cuts through a few more children playing the game, like Phil in Generation 4, staring at Ronith floating in the air, clearly trying to think of a way to catch him. It also cuts to Amber, with both the player and the Amber pet safely locked in their separate prisons. This is something that could have completely possibly happened even to Paul, perhaps it was just a silly mistake. But it could also coincide with what I was talking about earlier, about Amber being a child also trapped in the game. Nobody moves in this recording. We could have very well been watching a recording of Amber playing as the Amber pet, not as the player. Though that would not make much sense considering the player is usually seen as not the default character. It could also be referencing the fact that Amber seems to be attached to the cage in some way, and therefore has just locked herself in, rather than actually playing the game. It could be some sort of a psychological diagnosis that Marvin is trying to make happen through a game. The footage then cuts to Belle 3, figuring out the piano puzzle, which is a bit more complicated, I would say, certainly for a young child, once again referring to her being very smart. The call sign reminds us of the game still being a bit buggy, as it clips through a few of the assets. This was actually the last pet Belle caught, playing the same message Paul received when catching all the pets, in episode 13, only a little bit before he stopped speaking to us. I'm assuming something similar happened to Belle here. The episode ends there. Episode 20 is fittingly almost 20 minutes long, and it is the Marvin recordings, loaded up and cut through. It all starts with the Garolina logo, tilted by 45 degrees this time. Marvin starts a new game, calling it MVM. I'm not sure why he doesn't just call it Marvin. It doesn't really matter. The game clearly knows who he is in spite of that. It goes to the usual even care gameplay, though a few things of note are that, first of all, the "you can't open doors" sign doesn't appear here. The door is just locked, so that's clearly a Paul-specific thing. The parts where Marvin is going through Amber's room and through the hallway with signs are also cut out. Clearly those signs were important in some way, most likely saying something completely different to what Paul found there. Marvin also seems to be struggling quite a bit with the cheat code in this room. He does manage to enter it at the end though. It is quite interesting that Marvin also doesn't have the sound test in the options menu here. So is this perhaps a part of the game Marvin can't access, which is why he needs to use Paul? Or is the sound test just something that has been added to the game later on? Marvin then leaves even care. Interestingly, he does not see the screen with a head and face here. Instead, he sees a really nice purple room with pink tiles on the floor. I'm not sure where this room could be. He appears in the same place as Paul, on the Newmaker plane. However, here, text boxes begin to appear after a bit of Marvin wandering around. The wandering is actually cut through quite a bit, with the name of the safe changing a few times, showing Marvin has been running around for quite a while now. The text boxes read, "Hi Marvin, Rainer here. You have to be careful this time. If you start running out there without a sense of purpose, you'll get lost. I'm writing this on July 10th, 1997, and Care is still missing. We are searching. Last weekend, we almost got lost ourselves. Your search is harder. Beyond here, there are no landmarks, but this model of a brick building, though crude, should still be familiar to you." Marvin wanders around a little before another text box appears. Where is this building? It feels like the game once again intertwining with real life, explaining a bit about how Paul found the house before. Real life seems like the only possible clue here if there are no landmarks or ways to track how far he has gone. From here, I want you to find a grave. You know the grave I'm talking about. It's definitely out here somewhere. It's unmarked, of course. That's the trouble. You're the only person who can find it. This text box feels weirdly out of place also, with Rainer talking about this so calmly. He must know Marvin dug up the grave. Is he enjoying the fact that he finally caught him? Or is he trying to trick Marvin into thinking it's actually fine? Or is it something completely different? I have talked about how I don't think Lena is actually dead, so this would explain Marvin's confusion as he runs aimlessly for a bit, in all directions, before coming back to the brick building. Increase your speed so you can search faster. This at least explains why Marvin is so much faster than everyone else. The game then cuts to footage from Generation 8, where Marvin seems to have finally found the grave, finding a door, the same as the one Paul walked through for the first time in episode 2. This door, however, seems to be placed somewhere else, as once Marvin opens it, having no trouble with opening doors, he walks into a room we've never seen before. The textures are the same, but the place is different. There is a sign which reads, "Roadmap." Marvin goes to the right, finding another sign, "Caskets." When these are done, they'll be great. Anybody who sees them is sure to become part of the family. We are now standing in front of the 5 caskets themselves, all of them having different descriptions. So let's read. The first casket is a chalkboard with 5 words on it. The words are unfortunately completely unreadable. This one is called Casket 4. 5 words, written on a chalkboard, and the dirty building you inhabit. The second casket is a piece of wall and a piece of carpet, with what appears to be a picture of a gift on it. This one is called Casket 3. After kicking out of the house, your wife started painting the walls black to cover the stencils. I helped. She made it feel urgent. That Saturday, busy with work, she pinned a note. It contained a list of objects. The third one is a red pyramid. These objects might be becoming a bit familiar to you by now. I also can't believe I have to look this up because I just wasn't seeing it, but the thing in the middle of the pyramid is obviously Kier's face. This one is called Casket 2. As I painted, I watched Kier dance around the house. She liked to spin. She became a blur. But in that blur, somehow, as she spun around, from 45 degrees to 90 to 180 to 360 to 720, 1080, 1440, 1800, 2160, winding, tightening, tightening. I was stunned by pure horror and disgust. The fourth casket is a flower, the same one we tore petals from all the way back in episode 2. This one is called Casket 1. You showed Kier her red, blurry reflection in a vase. You said, "Do you see that? Look how ugly you are now." Kier squinted her eyes. The reflection wasn't clear at all, but as he began to describe her grisly deformities, she began to see them. "Nobody wants to see you like this," you said. But she soon escaped, and bravely returned home. In her bathroom mirror, she saw a clear picture. Marvin swiftly runs off to the right, but before we talked about what he finds there, let's talk about these caskets, because these are really important. As some of you may have already picked up on, all of these objects are within the game, and they are objects which you have already seen. Or rather, didn't see. The pyramid was in the gift in episode 9. The carpet shows us this is the wall we had to paint over in episode 14. The flower is most likely what Paul found in the room of Kier with eyebrows, and it really scared him back then.
I put Mike's eyebrows on her. I could have put other eyebrows on her, but I didn't.
And the 5 words on a chalkboard we haven't seen yet, but we have been told about in the sign with the censored objects, which is most likely the list of objects his wife left in the house. I've commented before on how casually Rainer was talking about the grave, but it's clear here that he found out what Marvin did and was disgusted. Onto these censored objects themselves, I believe a lot of these are in somewhat low resolution and perhaps simplified a bit. Maybe this is just my brain refusing to accept that censored objects have been such casual looking things, but either way, it is very fascinating to finally know what these are. Also, looking at the red pyramid with a girl's face on it, I can totally understand why Paul would be terrified by seeing this coming out of a gift.
What the fuck?
One thing which is a bit surprising is the shock Paul felt back when he found the flower in Kier's room in episode 7. There could be a lot of symbolism behind it. The idea that makes the most sense to me is that it makes Paul feel some sort of guilt for taking all of the petals from the flower and turning Kier into the red, glitched out figure that she was in the end. This part of the game also really solidifies Marvin being a horrible father, with Rainer talking about all the horrible things he's done. Rainer clearly wasn't testing the game out with Marvin in person, otherwise he would have most likely found out about Kier right away. He seemingly used the game to get Marvin to show him everything, including the location of the grave. On the right, Marvin finds another sign, this time one that reads, Places. The first place Marvin sees is a tunnel, kind of looking like the entrance to the school building, just without lights. Going by it, Marvin enters a road we've been on before, but he can only enter it from a different direction. The hallway would enter this place from would be on the right. This also explains where Marvin was trying to go back in episode 8, trying to go back to this place.
I think you're confused, Marvin.
The game, unfortunately for him, outgrew it. He runs off the screen first, but the game is unfinished here as well, before Marvin decides to go along the hallway, seeing the exact same images we saw all the way back in episode 2. The only difference is, here there is no scary sound effect when Marvin looks at the picture of school. Then, the game cuts to Marvin standing in front of Mike's grave, not cancelling the sign, so that it stays on screen as a dark reminder. The game then cuts to Marvin talking to the tool. The first question he asks, "Did you find Lena?" "I don't know." That seems to confirm the fact that Lena did not in fact die. I don't believe Marvin would be asking this question if Rainer found the grave. "Who is your boss?" "I don't know." "What year is it?" The green calendar appears. Marvin runs around a bit before going over to the windmill, which looks the same, but has 3 extra buttons on it. Up, down, and turn. He first goes all the way up, above the windmill. What we see doesn't seem to be all too important, but you can hear very quiet, faint voices of a child, presumably Care.
And what you look like. Look like. See what this is. See what kind of things. See what you look like. Now, all that you look like.
By the way, this is most likely not something you're going to hear in the actual episode, or at least not very clearly. I amplified it by quite a lot. I'm assuming this recording of Care's voice was also made by Domenica, but in the context of Petscop, I would actually say this plays really well into the strong resemblance between Paul and Care, because they do sound oddly similar here. This also links together with the next Petscop episode, as that is a recording of Care dancing around the sign, also playing on Generation 8. I originally thought that episode was simply a flashback, but it seems that it was actually what Care was doing while Marvin was listening from the windmill. This is most likely happening after Care has been found, and she is no longer with him, so this game is like a faint connection between them. Marvin then goes all the way down, until the camera begins recording itself in a pretty weird way. Marvin then turns around, seeing a cube with a symbol. This is a symbol in the room between Rance's and Penn's room. I think Rainer is trying to remind Marvin of Mike also, as that was the room his brother's first save was in. I also never thought much of this, but the symbol does very much look like the cross in a grave. This could also be a reference to the painting in that room. It is very simplistic, but this could very well be the plane without the windmill. Marvin then goes to the game menu, checking his pets. He has Toneth, which he gave to Paul earlier on. Paul opens the game menu. Within the game menu, the sign now reads, "Your butt leaves a cavity in the chair." This sounds like the game mocking the player for being stuck here. He goes to the sound test again, which is where the episode ends. I already talked about this episode a little bit. It's quite short. It's not like a whole lot of stuff happens with it. The recording is called Care Dancing Sign, which is actually synced with a song called The Sign by Ace of Base. I originally thought this episode was sort of like a flashback to Care just being an innocent child, but looking at it now, there might be a little bit more to it. I never really listened to Ace of Base, but the song's lyrics clearly deal with topics that also appear in Petscop. I saw the sign, and it opened up my mind, and I'm happy now, living without you. I've left you. I saw the signs and it opened up my eyes. I saw the signs. No one's gonna drag you up to get into the light where you belong. If this is related to anything in the series itself, it is most likely related to Care, or possibly also Rainer playing the song, trying to get over Marvin. I don't believe this is something heavily related or filled with clues as to what it means, but I think it is a really nice reference. I have also seen a comment linking this to Care spinning, as this could technically be talking about her spinning around her house, but from what I'm seeing, it doesn't really look like a spin. Since this episode is quite short, I would like to use this time to talk about something that has been on my mind for a few episodes now. Throughout all of these recordings, Paul hasn't spoken once, and it is thoroughly unnerving. All of the comment sections of these videos are filled with people asking what happened to Paul. It's a little bit sweet. It makes you really appreciate how much of a lovable protagonist Paul is. Or was. Petscop 22 is much longer, over 25 minutes, and surprisingly enough, Paul is once again talking here.
Hey. How's it going?
Unfortunately, I don't think he's talking to us from the present. You're in a saved recording of Generation 8, with Paul trying to reveal out something he did a while back, it would seem. Though I doubt he did this for himself, it is most likely for somebody else wanting to see this recording. Because when you sync this recording with episode 10, where Paul has also asked the game, "Where was the windmill?" it syncs up perfectly. The audio also doesn't sound like Paul talking about this currently. It generally sounds like he was talking about all of this way before the events of episode 14.
Not yet. Actually, I wanted to go with you tomorrow.
So it seems that somebody has made Paul reload this recording and combined with an old audio recording he's had to upload it on the public site of the YouTube channel. What is also quite interesting to note while watching this recording is that Paul has apparently been playing the game for 7 generations. The game has clearly been evolving on its own. We already sort of knew this, from it being a growing organism, but it still fascinates me the way Rainer created a game, which takes in the outer world, and just makes it a part of itself. In the episode itself, the censored object from episode 10 appears once again. Unfortunately, it wasn't one of the caskets, and I have no idea what else it could be. However, there are a few hints.
Yeah, I'm okay. What do you think of that picture?
Paul is once again on a call, talking to someone directly, which is most likely the friend he was also talking to in episode 10.
Yeah, so I went up and I typed, "Where is the windmill?" and that didn't work. And so I tried, "Where was the windmill?" and that's how I got the text in the picture.
Paul goes on to talk about the numbers on the picture, which are most likely some sort of a geographical location. This would also explain why it was censored.
Yeah, I looked them up. The top numbers, I looked them up. You're gonna want to look them up yourself. Yeah, punch them in.
You're definitely talking about a real-life place here.
I know, me too. That was what, the first thought. Not yet, actually, I wanted to go with you tomorrow.
Even though this is a recording from a long time ago, it is still very nice to hear Paul so excitedly talking about meeting up with someone.
Friday. How about that? Okay. No, I'm gonna sit on it until then.
The person on the other side of the call seems to be trying to evade meeting up with Paul.
I don't know, I'm not recording. I stopped it.
This explains why Paul has had to find the recording. He most likely had audio to it, but no video to accompany it.
Yeah, we would have to find out how big. Like, we'd have to find out how big a tile is. One of the tiles. Like, if we could figure out how big one tile is, what I'm thinking we should do, go and measure the stone on the ground, compare it to the size of the windmill in the game, and then we can use that for conversions. Which we can do it based on tiles, how far we can walk in a second, like speed, whatever is the easy way to do what I'm thinking.
I have said this a bunch of times now, but I am pretty amazed by how scientifically and logically Paul is treating the entire situation. This also definitely confirms, at least for me, how Paul found the house. He simply measured the steps he would have to take from the place of the windmill to the house, using the tower as some sort of a landmark. I would assume the tower also meant something to the family, though what that could be, I'm not sure. Here, Paul's also talking about the family already being in contact with him, and intimidating him.
No, they don't know much more than we do now. They didn't. I don't like talking to them. They intimidate me. And I'm sure they wouldn't intimidate you at all. Hey, have they called you? They haven't called you, right? I mean, Jill specifically. She hasn't called you. No, I didn't voluntarily mention you. She asked because you know I'm talking to you in the first few videos, right? And so she asked who I'm talking to in the videos, and so I told her, but she didn't ask anything else, so I don't think she actually cares. And and you don't have to worry about it, right? Because you aren't family, so you wouldn't have a room. That's the thing.
He is also talking about rooms. I think this could be related to the discs in the house, with them possibly also containing rooms through which your family could do something.
I didn't mean it that way. Just you probably don't have a room. That's my only point.
With this bit of dialogue, it also sounds like the person on the other side of the phone is quite mad that Paul doesn't consider them family.
Yeah, no, it's fine. No, you don't want her calling you anyway. Like you won't be able to escape that's the thing, if she were to start. Yeah.
I think we might know who they are now, but I don't want to spoil it just yet. Paul then goes back to talking about Jill, and how his friend wouldn't be able to escape if she called her. This all looks together pretty well, with Jill being quite controlling. The why she's trying to control them is still a bit mysterious, but I believe she's trying to bring Marvin back. Paul walks away from the tool, the censorship box disappears, And he goes back to talking to his friend, talking about needing their genius.
And I should start taking you up on that offer. Hey, I need your genius.
So he clearly considers this person quite smart. I'm making this really obvious, am I not?
Yeah, I need your puzzle genius.
He then goes to the quitter's room. The person on the other side seems to be once again trying to get away.
Yeah. You weren't in the middle of something, were you? I can let you go. Good. Well, okay. So, I was expecting the cage puzzle to lead into something else.
Before we go on, I would like to talk a bit more about the idea of Jill being back. In episode 11, the description is talking about the family taking the channel. I would assume that after he went to find the windmill, and also the grave, he met some of the family members, and they intimidated him into giving them the channel. From everything we have heard from them so far, it very much makes sense for them to be controlling, considering the treatment of both Mike and Care. Going back to the episode, Paul talks about he was expecting Amber's cage puzzle to be leading to something else, but there being nothing on the other side of the quitter's room, not even Tiara this time.
Yeah, completely. Like you look over on the other side, and now there's not. There was like the Tiara character was there, and then I left, and then the next time I came back, they were gone.
As they keep on talking, the footage cuts to Paul outside of the quitter's room, moving around.
Give me a second to verify that logic.
Suddenly, he gets asked about being in a car.
Why would I be in a car? I'm playing Petscop. Why would I be playing Petscop in a car? The fuck?
If it wasn't for this clip, I would have given up on my car theories a long time ago, but I find it difficult to believe that with clips like these, him playing in a car would not be something that played at least some sort of a role. I think the way the game works, at least in the initial stages of taking people in, but most likely even far beyond that, it works sort of like an addiction. I would compare my idea to the ring from Lord of the Rings. It is something you can technically take off or resist, but it is difficult. This does make the idea of Paul playing Petscop in a car before seem a lot more realistic, even as he sounds like he's trying to come up with excuses while he goes to the road under the Newmaker plane.
Doesn't make any sense. No, that was my door.
Where he gets hit by a car.
Hey, what the fuck?
Tiara walks into the frame, standing on the road. Then, we hear this bit of dialogue. The subtitles are especially important here.
Hey. You there? Oh, you there? Hello?
We know what happened here now. Belle is the friend Paul's been talking to this whole time, which is why she's mad about not being a part of the family. She is very smart, but she failed their birthing ritual and so is not allowed in the family, which clearly bothers her. I'm still trying to put together how exactly the game taking in players works here. I think as a player you can be in two modes. Once you have been sort of clocked into it, you can either be out of the game when your character doesn't appear in it, which seems to be quite difficult, or alternatively, you can be in the game, moving your character around, but you can't control your body in the real life.
You want me to do something?
Paul's trying to communicate with Belle, but she obviously can't respond. She does first subtly pointing to the right,
What do you want?
before pointing to it with a more dire expression, before running around and trying to show Paul to go to the right.
What?
Then the game suddenly fades to the footage of the tunnel, going to the skull with the clock. This is all happening surprisingly quickly, and it makes me wonder whether Paul cut through it, or if this is what actually happened here. I don't think we have seen fade transitions in the footage ever before, and Paul also went quiet here, so it does kind of feel like the game very subtly interrupting him. We can also hear some noise of Paul moving around in his seat, which could be him sort of falling into this state where he can control the in-game character. It also helps that after episode 10 and episode 11, Paul seems to have realized a lot about the game and became a lot more secretive. This could be attributed to somebody else being in control of the channel, but Paul still clearly sounded a lot more careful with what he's saying in that episode.
Signs along the way, that I ignored. because it would have been a completely ridiculous idea to me.
So it makes sense that Paul would go through some very strange experiences at that point in the Petscop timeline. If we go along with the theory of players being unable to do anything in real life while being consumed in the game in this way, it could very well be somebody forcing Paul to stop his real life activities. Or it could just be the game fading back into the current time of the series, stopping the recovered recordings he was going through. Speaking of time, the clock appears again, but I'm still not sure what it means. It clearly changes the in-game time, and I am beginning to get an idea of how that might affect the general timeline, but I cannot figure it out. We then appear in front of the school, with a cheetah walking around before turning into the Guardian, with Paul presumably still playing it. We enter the school, getting back into the strange first-person view, finding a locker, but we're unable to open the lock on it. The footage then suddenly cuts to Paul walking up the stairs, finding a slightly slimmer school corridor. Paul once again gets bounced around in front of the girl picture. This time it seems a bit more urgent, the pushing a bit more sudden. Paul once again walks into the picture, but this time, he can actually walk through it. Why couldn't he do this before? I don't know. Might have something to do with the time changing. What follows is one of the most emotional moments in the series for me, though it probably won't be for you. I won't go too much into the details of it, but I remember when I was little, I really struggled with stuff mentally. I still kind of do, but though I think I do a lot better with it now. Back then I always kind of felt like what I really needed was to be taken aside to a quiet room and talk it through with someone. The dark music replaced with the somewhat monotone background hums. We could just play a board game while I get through it. Why did this not happen? Behind the room, there is what appears to be a counseling room, with 2 chairs and a table, all of them quite large. The first-person view really makes perspective kind of complicated. We never actually see how big our character is here. A text box then appears. Hi there. Sorry for pulling you out of class. I know you've been busy catching up. Don't worry, I just want to talk with you. Hey, do you want to play a game? You can pick any game you want, and we can play it together. I hate how much this gets to me. I hate how much I relate to this whole series. Like, this should not be relatable content. At all. But here we are. I'm on my 4th or 5th hour of talking about it. We then go to a shelf with games, where we can pick from 4 games. Accident, Rotation, Checkers, and Grave Robber. We pick Grave Robber, which we play whilst more text boxes of the counselor talking appear. Grave Robber is kind of like Battleship. Oh, you already know Grave Robber? That's good. I don't like explaining things. Some people have attempted to figure out the rules of this game. However, I would rather just focus on the dialogue. Perhaps worth noting about the game design is that there is a windmill in the game, as well as figures which look just like Lena's grave. The text boxes throughout the game read, I called you several times and you didn't come. Do I have the wrong name here? I noticed you named your file Strange Situation. Is that your name? Please confirm. A question box pops up after his text box, into which Paul types out his name. Paul. The name Paul, as well as Strange Situation, are marked in red, which is quite strange, considering he is usually marked in yellow. This might have something to do with neither of these being the file name the counseling room was expecting. We are clearly living through Care's experiences here. There is a good chance the game is expecting us to just be called Care. Are you right-handed or left-handed? You don't know? Really? Well, which hand do you write with? That one? That's your left hand. That means you're left-handed. I'm right-handed. I use this hand. My right is actually your left. Isn't that confusing? Anyway, your turn. This seems like a question specifically tailored to Paul, as he has been known to struggle with directions. Or, perhaps, this is something Kier has also struggled with, forming an even stronger resemblance between them. In my opinion, the second option is a lot more likely here. I would also like to know that this piece of dialogue is going to be quite important by the end of this episode. Moving 5 times in a row was a mistake. Now I can't retrace all my steps. You should dig often. It helps you win. This is most likely a reference to Rainer saying, I want to retrace your steps, in the spell in Petscop 17. He supposedly cast on Care. These two things could be linked, or this could very well be a moment where Care got triggered, because the next text box that pops up says, kids shouldn't say swear words. Do you know why? It just doesn't sound right. It's disturbing. You should choose clear words, even when you're really angry. Your turn. This does not sound like too helpful advice, although I'm not sure what could it really mean. That's a very big boo-boo on your face. We're going to help you. Together. Everyone is. When you reach for your shoes will be there. When you walk through a doorway, the door will be open. Wherever you go, the floor will continue under your feet. Every move you make will be made valid. Everything you see will become real. Everything you say will become the truth. Your turn. This feels quite strange, like a pretty big shift in tone. It almost feels like the therapist is trying to validate Care's visions and strange feelings, instead of trying to find out why are they happening. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the way Anna tried to comfort Care in episode 14. Seemingly, no one wants to talk about the abuser in the room. Marvin. Paul decides to quit the game. You want to quit? Why? Oh, I don't blame you. Grave robbery is vile. This is an awful game, huh? We can play something else if you want. It's okay. You can go. I hope you can find your real house. Paul afterwards leaves. The real house comment here is pretty interesting as well. I believe this might be referring to Care seeing things in the house differently. Perhaps the counselor wants her to find a house that actually looks like it. In a more regular setting, this would sound like the counselor hoping Care would find a place where she would feel at home. But here, it feels like what is expected to change the home, because there is no way Care has issues. She only has puzzles. Paul goes back into the school building, no longer getting pushed in front of the girl picture. He runs downstairs, seeing a huge red and black hole in the wall. He walks right into it. Here, the most horrifying music yet starts playing. A distorted, buzzing synth in a completely dark room. But the room is not empty. There's a staircase in it, with Paul walking down. If you brighten up the screen, you can see there are 3 doors. Paul goes to the left, but actually, for him, this is the right. The therapist saying, "My right is your left," was clearly foreshadowing this happening. This is most likely also what Tiara was trying to warn Paul about, telling him to go to the right or to the left from her perspective. As Paul walks through the door, the camera glitches out as it tries to pan after him. The episode ends there, giving us no further explanation as to what happens. However, I believe there actually is an explanation here. Back in episode 3, in the text box, the passage to my right will lead to her. She will come out of the darkness, limping, and I will shoot her in the head. I'm not sure what exactly this means. I believe we are living through Care's memories here, and I don't believe she was shot. Whatever happened there are quite a few references to people walking to the right and things going horribly wrong. It is another one of those moments where Petscop really takes full advantage of our imagination and lets us fill in the truly mortifying blanks. Petscop 23 is what I consider to be the final episode of the series. Episode 24 is more of an afterword. It is over 20 minutes long and starts off on an opening screen, fading into a demo sequence, with a loading screen image of what seems to be Marvin's head in 3D. Paul is once again going upstairs, somewhere in the school building. The Garalina logo appears for a moment, in a dark blue narration on a black background, before we get to the floor above us. We enter a room with the Garalina logo in it again. The room very much looks like an informatics classroom, with computers along the walls. There is also a spinning object inside of this room, with collectibles floating all around it, looking very similar to Lena's grave. There is a screen in the middle of the room, which reads, Petscop Kids. This seems to be the room where the game was tested with children at the school. I would assume Marvin used his position in the school to get kids to come test the game out. There are numbers above each one of the computers, as well as a clock on each one of the tables, spinning endlessly. Perhaps this is a way for Marvin to control how much time the kids spend figuring the game out, though the clocks don't have much attention paid to them. The computers here also have the same sign on them as the PC in the house, the sign of 𝕔𝕠𝕟𝕔𝕚𝕦𝕤𝕚. The green tool, which always appears when we're in this building, starts shaking as Paul approaches this strange-looking shape. This time it even glows, as you get 26 collectibles from around the object. This object confuses me a bit. At first, I thought it was a symbol for a grave, but the subtitles label the clicking sounds in it as boss sounds. This is not the first time we see the term boss used in the game. It is a word Marvin also asked the tool about, asking who is its boss. So does this mean Lena is in some way considered to be a boss? It is all very confusing, and convinces me further that Lena is not actually dead. Furthermore, it is also worth mentioning that in a Reddit post talking about the PS controller language the characters use, it is explained how saying the word Lena in that language would sound the same as boss, meaning when people say boss, they might very well be saying Lena. I think this is definitely a connection worth mentioning, even if that sign language is not something I focused on in this video. The room goes completely dark afterwards, only leaving the glowing Petscop Kids screen in the center of it. Ignoring the entire boss tangent, I believe this shows that the room was used to test the game with children. But it would seem that once Lena came into the school, the room stopped being used. Paul finds his way back through the darkness, finding a door with a classroom behind it, with a chalkboard and 5 words on it. I've tried to adjust this as much as possible, but I believe the 5 words are a mystery that is just not meant to be figured out. We look away from the chalkboard, and simplistic as the graphics are, whilst finding out all of this, Marvin standing right behind Paul is horrifying. "What room are you in?" Marvin asks. Paul walks around the room, finding 8 rooms on the walls, numbered just like the computers, looking like slightly more detailed models of the room from the ghost room. One thing which I find a bit odd is that all of these were rooms where people actually lived in. Why would you have your chair just randomly placed in the room and the TV right next to your bed? After a little while, Paul finds the room from his ghost room. It is worth noting that this is room number 1, which is most likely linked to Tiara calling Paul Player 1. "Thanks. Here I come," Marvin says. "What? No. No." Paul stops halfway through typing out another no. The room stands still for a very long time. I have a theory as to what may be happening here. I believe Marvin knows where all of the people testing the game live, or at least knows where the various rooms are, and I think he may have decided to pay Paul a visit. It seems like a very ugly and unexpected trick, but if everyone else can technically exist outside of the game, it seems unlikely that Marvin wouldn't be able to, at least for a little while. And as far as ugly goes, this would be far from the ugliest crime he has committed. Perhaps it's just me, but my imagination does do a really good job at imagining Marvin attacking Paul. The footage cuts to the exact same room, with Marvin leaving. Paul says what he already had loaded up, probably got rid of the speech window. Not in table. Tiara comes into the room. "I'm sorry." I'm not sure what exactly Tiara did here. There is a possibility she told Marvin where Paul lived. Marvin does hurt Tiara. He could get information out of her that way. Paul simply says, "Help." Tiara walks up to the chalkboard and uses Nifty to draw 3 numbers on the board, 9, 2, and 19. Paul quickly figures out what he's supposed to do. He goes to the locker with a lock on it, opening it up with Tiara's code. The locker contains two things, an egg and a letter. Your new life letter. The name, Tiara Leszkiewicz. Your message. You are off to school today. I will miss you. I love you so much. I miss you so much when you're off to school for the day. I'll be waiting for you when you come home. I will be on a lawn chair in the driveway waiting for the bus to drop you off. Every day I'm so happy to see you come home and tell me what you learned. I hope everyone treats you with love and respect. I love you forever, no matter what. Mommy. This letter is very emotional in way too many ways. It might seem a bit silly, but it seems like Tiara didn't come back from the bus one day. It seems she has instead been forced into a rebirthing ritual by Marvin, because he wanted her as a child instead of care. Tiara seemed a lot more fitting to take care of her own puzzles. It is also quite important considering we now know Tiara's surname, Leszkiewicz, meaning she is most likely Lena's daughter. The ages here would certainly make sense. I believe Lena did not die, but rather she became invisible to the family. What she did remains unknown, but she most likely did something that made Marvin not want to be around her anymore. That really made him angry. It made her run away, and she became invisible, as she did not fit the seemingly strict criteria to become a part of the family. Marvin then tried to get Lena back, but she did not come. She was strong enough to stay away. I also believe that Marvin legitimately could not find Lena's grave, since there most likely wasn't one. So Rainier was most likely wrong on finding a grave, meaning the contents of episode 17 were just a recording of him trying to find it. This does pose somewhat of an interesting question on whether Mike is even dead, though I would believe that with more certainty. Rainier doesn't seem like the type of person who would treat his own brother as invisible over things like this. What exactly is the egg in the locker? We don't know yet, but we are about to find out. Paul goes down the same staircase from last episode again, this time going to the front, finding a room with a huge hole in the middle, and a sign. You'll find the machine up ahead. This is the only entry or exit. You will pass through this room once again as you leave. Keep in mind, everything here, your baby will see. So this is the room. This is the room at school where the rebirthing seemed to have been attempted. There are a few objects around the hall, which Paul can throw into it. I believe these objects represent certain traits you do or don't want your child to have. I'm not sure what exactly they could mean. With some of them I can't even tell what they are, but I think they do represent something of the kind. Paul pushes a few objects into the hole, before this one, which I believe is a frame of some kind, of a childhood photo of the child getting reborn, getting thrown away as a way of getting rid of the child's past. This seems to end this strange ritual, as the door on the side of the room opens. There is a completely dark room behind it, with nothing but Care B in it. The card jingle never felt more out of place. Care B also has the most horrifying character description in the entire game. Care B is scared and pounding on the door. I open it. It's so dark that I can't see her. So I pull her out, and the light hits her face. And they won't even give me a picture of her now. They're all scattered in graves. And I'm a piece of shit. Here I go. A shovel starts going across the text box until it goes out of the screen. This is where I believe Marvin kept Care whilst trying to rebirth her, so that she would not get away from the school basement. Whilst I've said I don't want to talk about this anymore, there has definitely been taken some form of inspiration from the Candace Newmaker story when coming up with this ritual. I also think this is where Marina most likely found Care, and found out what happened to her, when paying Marvin some sort of a visit. It is a bit unclear whether he actually killed the people in there, or whether this is some kind of a metaphor. Paul then walks into the room behind this one, finding the machine up ahead, a strange construction with Tiara, as well as Marvin standing right in front of it. We know the machine wants 1,000 pieces from when Tiara spoke to us through a tool. Paul only has 500, but the machine doesn't seem to mind as it takes all of them. Then, Marvin speaks. Put baby. Paul opens the pet list, taking care of B and putting her into the machine, which looks very similar to the machine in the child library. He spins it around, and Kirby's face conveys way too much emotion for such a low resolution. Time to play, Marvin says, stopping the synth noises as he drops the needles piano for Paul. He begins playing. At first, he is just playing the same note over and over again, before beginning to play with the subtitles labeled as Paul's Melody. Marvin and Tiara stand there perfectly still, before Paul starts playing the melody, making Marvin run out of his place. Fuck. Stop. Stop. Marvin runs around, clearly panicked, trying to take the needles piano away. I will admit, this is very satisfying to watch, especially as Marvin runs away. It is also a nice touch that the notes Paul is playing become a bit more reverbed once Marvin leaves. He then goes to the machine, turning it around, finding an egg there, similar to the one we have found in the locker. Paul picks it up, checking the list of pets, finding it in the blank, mysterious spot that has been there the entire time. This is something we begin noticing as the series closes itself. It wraps itself up really nicely, referencing many events and mysteries of the very early episodes. This is something that starts as soon as you open the egg's description, which reads, ? You should start thinking about that. This is a lovely reference to the very first episode, the very first pet we caught in the game, Ember, whose description read, "What is the safest place you can put her in?" You should start thinking about that.
So here you can see all the pets that you've collected.
Paul runs out of the room with the needles on him, which disappears as he goes to the next room. He runs up to Tiara's locker, opening it up again, placing the egg there. I think the meaning of this is really sweet, and some of you may have already figured it out, but I will leave that for the ending, when I really put this stuff together, because it might not actually make that much sense now. Paul walks out of the school, in front of the bench. The whole place suddenly lights up with bright blue light, fading us into the last frame of the episode, before going back to the starting menu. The frame is an empty chair in front of a Petscop computer in what looks like a garage. I interpret this as sort of a final approving frame of Rainer. Unfortunately, it is also somewhat sad with Rainer not being there, and we will soon get to discussing why. But first, let's talk about episode 24. Episode 24 is really confusing for me. It is the closing episode of the series, yet it leaves me with so many unanswered questions because I'm really struggling to figure it out. I might be reaching into the comments for inspiration in this part quite a bit, because this one is really confusing, to me at least. It starts with a Newmaker plane, with the sky still glowing blue, with no character, no Paul, Marvin, Tiara, or the Guardian. Paul goes to the menu of the game. The sign now reads, Now. He opens up the book of baby names. This is a section of the settings Paul found out about a long time ago, but could never use.
I meant to talk about this, because this doesn't do anything, right? This menu option, nothing happens. I'm guessing at some point you could name your pets. Right, and this was like suggestions or something. Yeah, it's just showing that doesn't do anything.
Paul originally assumed this was a section of the game which would give you suggestions on how to name your pets, but of course that's not what it does. What it does instead is, it opens with the Petscop kit sign, and afterwards gives you a list of names in alphabetical order. The entire time, the two beats of the Even Care theme are playing, without the cheering jingles. It feels like a very circular narrative of just about everything we went through alongside Paul. These are the names of the children who have tested the game before him. The names here are also linked with words. I won't talk about most of them, because there are quite a few here, but I would like to talk about a few that stood out to me. First of all, there is a name Jack here, connected with dog. I think I will leave the exact meaning of this one up to interpretation, but we know that the dog in Petscop did not have the best fate. There's Amber, who is an angel. There's Belle, who's smart. And there's Carrie, dizzy. Then there is Larry, the tool maker, which would lead you to believe he is the one who originally gave Rainer the idea for how the tools should look. There is Mike, who is a painter. I was expecting Mike to be a gift, but it would seem that he actually painted that drawing in Even Care, which also seems to confirm my idea that it was a drawing of the plane without the windmill. Then again, it could be anything, but I do not believe that is just a random asset, and that is the only thing I can relate it to. There is also Tony, who is a dummy. To quote this YouTube comment,
No, you're a genius.
Outside of that, I believe this is a board where Rainer originally wanted to give a shout out to all of the kids who helped him with the game. It's actually kind of cute. I believe most of this episode is just how Rainer originally intended for the game to end. Unfortunately, as usual, there are some very dark implications here. This awesome commenter counted the names for me, so I didn't have to figure out that there are 45 names. We know there were supposed to be 48 pets in the game, so it seems that there are 3 people missing. Paul, Tiara, and here. The comments say the third one missing is Lena, but I doubt that. The playtesters were kids. Lena would be at least 27 by the time Rainer would even start working on the game. I'm not sure who exactly this third missing person could be. And now, a message from Miss Mark, who is working very hard as we speak. Hi Michael, consider this your birthday card. Sorry I can't put money in it. When I heard how many kids were coming to your party, I was impressed. Thank your big brother for letting you and your friends play games all day and making you so popular. Also thank your other auntie for making this all possible. If you see her, I mean, not everyone can. But anyway, happy 7th. I am so sorry that I couldn't be here. I hope my gift makes up for it. It's the one in the black box. Carrie helped pick it out. Thank her. Opening gifts is so fun. A lot of little mysteries, and all are solved. So cathartic. Anyway, I sure hope you have fun. See you later. Love you, Auntie Anna. P.S. Whatever you do, please don't shake the box. This is obviously Marvin's wife speaking, and she gives us a lot to work with. Obviously, the big brother is Anna talking about Rainer, her talking about Michael's other auntie. This is where things get interesting. She's obviously talking about Lena, even talking about people not being able to see her. So the question here is, how did she make all of this possible? It would seem that she probably helped Rainer with the game in some way. That would make sense, considering her name even appears in the name Garolina. I never thought about it much, but looking over what people had to say about this particular episode, it makes a lot of sense. Lena is clearly pretty important to this game. Outside of that, the rest of the message actually seems pretty innocent. I've tried to think of how the word cathartic could be related to anything, but I couldn't think of anything. So the last thing we need to talk about is the black box. I have seen somebody talking about the dog could be the gift here. As they have noted, it does seem a bit strange that they would put a dog in a black box, but the people throughout Petscop don't exactly have a history of treating pets well. Some people think Mike got hit by a car alongside the dog, but I find that unlikely, considering the whole talk about being unable to find Michael A. I believe the dog got hit by a car, and Marvin chose to hang it on a wall, which is undoubtedly something that would traumatize a young child. It brings me back to Tona's original description, where Mike called Tona the stupid blob monster. Considering Marvin's previous behavior, I wouldn't be surprised if stuff like this upset him enough to put Mike's dog down. Marvin also writes that he does not believe the dog's emotions are real, so I really wouldn't be surprised if he did something like this. That is the end of episode 24. We have now gotten through all of the 24 episodes, and you might be under the impression that it's time for the conclusion of the series. But you would be mistaken. There's still the Petscop soundtrack to go over. The description of it reads, "Recovered from a 𝕔𝕠𝕟𝕔𝕚𝕦𝕤𝕚. To all involved, thank you." Track titles are the original source file names, aside from Sound Effects 1 and Sound Effects 2, which contain compiled sound effects. I believe this is Tony breaking the fourth wall slightly. It does not sound like Paul at all, and I don't believe anything in the description is particularly telling. Even the 𝕔𝕠𝕟𝕚 just feels like a nice reference. The soundtrack itself contains what you would expect, all of the songs and sound effects, and if you want to, you can actually get it on Bandcamp at petscop.bandcamp.com for a mere $5. I don't want to sound like I'm really trying to sell this to anyone, but I think the series is pretty amazing, and if you'd like to support it, this is one of the few ways in which you can. But once you go through all of the songs and sound effects, at the very end of the soundtrack, you will be greeted with an epilogue of sorts. The Sound Effects 2 part of the soundtrack ends with Keir saying,
And now.
and then the now ensues. Paul is now standing on that same light blue plane, with Tiara in front of him. Tiara says, "There's Boss waiting for her son. Pal, do you remember being born? Smuggled away, driving to your new house? Boss in driver's seat, me in the back. I could not wait to be your friend." Paul says, "Family." Tiara, "We can investigate this together." The end. And with that said, I don't think we have anything left to investigate ourselves. It's time to head to the conclusion. We have now reached the conclusion of Petscop. I would like to once again say that this is my conclusion. It is not the final conclusion, and there are a few points where I could pretty much choose how the story went, because I have no idea if there were any clues whatsoever pointing in either direction. With that said, let me put the events of the past 24 episodes into order, and to make the scattered timeline of Petscop just a little more chronological. The story of Petscop begins around the year 1968, with the birth of a child, a girl named Lena. She lives her life relatively regularly, becoming friends with a boy named Marvin, maybe becoming even a little more than friends. Lena also has a sister, who was born somewhere around this time, called Anna. One day, they go on a trip to a windmill. It seems harmless, until they go inside, and Lena does something. Looking back at the events of episode 6, she may have actually broken the windmill somehow. I haven't looked into tools much in this video, but if the white tool represents Lena, she's clearly jumping into all of the mechanisms inside of it. This makes Marvin very upset, making him refuse to see her. Then, the windmill disappears, alongside with young Lena. Marvin has tried to lure Lena back, but he couldn't. We could say she just got lost, though the usage of lure would make me more so believe that she evaded him on purpose. He isn't able to find her again as a result. Years go by, Marvin grows up, and gets married with Lena's sister, Anna, who took pictures of them at the windmill. Even after this, Marvin still struggles with memories of his lost friend Lena, although he can't do much about it at this point. I am only now realizing how cyclical the story is in a sense, with all this ironically start with Marvin himself being a traumatized child. It puts an interesting emphasis on the concept of people who have been hurt, going on to hurt people further. Marvin and Anna settle down, and after a little while, around the year 1990, they have a child. A little girl named Carrie.
See what this is. See what this.
She is growing up relatively normally. Marvin, however, still has memories of Lena, and wants a child which would be similar. Some people have theorized Marvin actually wanted to recreate Lena with Care, to relive his childhood with her. They have even talked about how Care not having eyebrows might be due to Marvin tearing them out to make her look more like Lena, which is probably the darkest path you can take with the entire series. I, however, won't be taking it, if for nothing else, than for it completely devaluing the idea of Marvin viewing disorders as puzzles. I will go with a more vague explanation of Marvin simply compensating for the loss of Lena. But Care, obviously, isn't Lena, which annoys Marvin quite a bit. Anna doesn't seem to realize what is going on. Around this time, Rainer is already working on Petscop. At first, he is only testing it out with his little brother, Mike, but he then also offers it to Care and Marvin. The game is about solving puzzles and catching pets. But Care doesn't seem to care, as she just dances around to the in-game music. Marvin then offers Rainer the opportunity to test the game out at the school, letting a bunch of children try it out. They also keep recordings of these children to make sure they get good testing data. Amongst them is the supremely smart Belle, or Tiara. Marvin gets the idea to rebirth Tiara as his child, as she seemed as a much better fit than Care. This process takes a while, but it is ongoing, parallel with Marvin giving Tiara the idea that she wants to become a part of his family. Around this time, Rainer also finds out about the story about the windmill and Lena. At first, he believes Lena is dead, but as he looks deeper into it, he finds out she is still alive, and gets in contact with her. And this also leads to him finding out more and more about Marvin, looking deeper into a past he probably didn't know about, or didn't give too much attention to before. Rainer's brother, Mike, is also annoying Marvin in some way, as you can see in the text box in episode 6. I believe that part of the text box is a hint to a lot more small annoyances that Mike inflicted on Marvin. Mike's birthday comes around, and Carrie helps pick a birthday gift for him. It is a dog in a black box. It lives in the house, but only for a little while, before it gets hit in a car accident, and it lives.
Uh-oh.
Pretty much everyone wants him to live, except for Marvin. He hangs it on a wall. After episode 24, I have no doubt the black gift on the wall, the casket, was supposed to represent the black box, or rather, what was inside of it. It was a dog. Mike is obviously traumatized by this, horrified. His Mike A status gets taken away, and he runs away to hide, eventually passing away as a result. I think that Mike was a gift on his grave actually has more of a symbolic meaning than it is often said to have. It fits really well with the themes of the game, but it also just says that Rainer's brother was a gift to him, in a much more human way. Anna begins to find out about everything around this time, especially with the dog on the wall, and she decides to kick Marvin out of the house, making him live in the school building, having a shared custody of Care. At first, they both get the same amounts of time with her, but as time goes on, Marvin gets less and less time to hang out with her, as you can see on the calendars. Anna also sets up a device, tracking Care, making sure she doesn't leave her room. This could just be the result of Care's declining mental state, but Anna may have also had an idea of what would happen next. Marvin decides to kidnap Care, making her live in the school building for months. Anna gets a notification that Kara has left the room, but is not fast enough to stop Marvin. Kara afterwards spends months in the school building, being tormented by Marvin, getting constant talks about how ugly she looks and how nobody wants to see her. Rainer is still in distant contact with Marvin through all of this, updating the game more as he wants to confront Marvin about what he's finding out, until he eventually manages to trap him inside of it. Perhaps the trapping might actually have something to do with Kara running away from the school, finally getting home. But as she arrives home, she isn't greeted with concern. She is instead greeted with an expectation to go back to how things were. She probably doesn't speak about what happened very openly, or at all, as the family seemingly doesn't know what happened whatsoever. Rainer is seeing all of this, knowing what actually happened, and probably also knowing that she wasn't safe in the house, where Marvin could easily find her, and so he thinks of a plan. Here is a big reveal, which I have been hinting at throughout this video numerous times.
I do agree there's a resemblance. Very strong resemblance.
I believe Paul is Kara reborn. I think there are enough signs, from their ages to the similarities between them, even similar voices, and also with Paul's memories of Kara being completely wiped.
I just don't remember even hearing about anyone going missing.
We don't have the details of the rebirthing ritual, but I would assume Paul wouldn't remember his life as Kara afterwards. I also think them being twins is unlikely, as Paul doesn't remember Kara at all. I also find it to be a pretty big sign that Petscop doesn't ever address the fate of Kara. If she had died, Rainer would have certainly confronted Marvin about it at some point, but he doesn't. Paul lost Kara after the rebirthing ritual, which Rainer somehow managed to do somewhat properly. He also tried to find a good parent for young Paul, and he finds Lena, who is also the mother of Tiara. He gives Paul to Lena. The Petscop soundtrack describes Paul being taken to Vlashkovit's house. We know Tiara was still with Lena after Kara's rebirth, but soon afterwards she got trapped in Petscop as well. With Kara missing, and nobody really being able to find her, we don't know much about the events of this time. I'm assuming life kind of went on, with Marvin, as well as Kara, being these lost family members. Though if the family saw the game, they definitely knew what happened to Marvin. They just didn't know how to get him out. Rainer also decides to give Lena, along with Paul, the disc with Petscop, making sure it's in safe hands. Unfortunately, as years go on, Lena sort of forgets about the game, and Paul finds it, deciding to see what it is.
See what this is.
Lena probably doesn't even care about it that much at this point. We don't know how much she truly knew about the Petscop story. There is a good chance she didn't find it as important as it truly was. Paul starts the game up, and decides to share his experience with his friend, Belle.
Alright, so, this is just to, prove to you that I'm not lying about this game that I found.
Here, there's one pretty big plot hole which I honestly have no idea how to get through. How did Paul and Belle become friends? Did she also forget they were family through the rebirth, even if it was failed? Possibly. Starting the game up, whatever effects it had on Belle before her come back, and she pleads for him to turn it off through the tool.
What the fuck?
But, assuming the game isn't actually haunted, or that it doesn't have real entities inside of it, Paul proceeds, slowly getting dragged into it as well. Learning about the game, he finds that it's intertwined with real life.
Haha. There it is.
He wants to go out and measure some things in real life to be able to find places inside of the game. At this time, one of the family members, probably Jill, either through a random search or through Marvin, finds out about Paul playing Petscop and decides to meet up with him as he goes out.
I don't like talking to them. They intimidate me. And I'm sure they wouldn't intimidate you at all.
They intimidate him and get him to give them the channel. They also probably reveal quite a lot about him to him, because right after episode 10, where all this supposedly happens, he is talking about having a room and just generally seeming a lot more timid.
Signs along the way, that I ignored.
He also gets a few cheat codes from the family when we're trying to help Marvin finish his original rebirthing plans, and are hoping to get Paul to figure the game out. They also might have an idea about how special Paul is in the game. Afterwards, the game begins to change around in front of Paul's eyes.
I think that was based off of a conversation that I had last year on my birthday.
He tries to ignore it, getting trapped in the game in episode 14, possibly also getting kidnapped. For a second time.
Fuck.
Thanks to their cheat codes, Paul is able to find various old recordings, finding out even more about the game, as well as his own past. Throughout all these experiences, a rebirthing ritual is being set up by Marvin inside of the game, which shows up in episode 23. I would assume Marvin was using Paul to help him with it, without Paul actually knowing what he was doing. Here, Paul is walking through the school, finding out about the place where the game was tested, as well as the classroom with the 5 words on the chalkboard. And with Marvin. He naively gives Marvin his location, getting viciously attacked, getting forced to keep going with a plan of rebirthing Care. He goes to the school basement, finding Care be there, putting her inside of the machine. Outside of basically living through his own rebirth, he's probably realizing he doesn't have all the 1,000 pieces required for the machine to work properly. Then, Marvin gives the needles to Paul to let him play the Stravinsky septet for the rebirth. I would assume Stravinsky's septet is the music that's supposed to be the best during the rebirth. It seems to be a specifically chosen song in episode 12. Paul, however, in a moment of immense bravery, doesn't play the Stravinsky septet, or Care's melody for that matter. He instead plays his own melody, Paul's melody. Marvin panics, unable to take the needles away from Paul. He runs away as Care gets reborn into an egg. This was originally presumably supposed to be Care A. It is also worth mentioning that whilst Marvin is trying to rebirth Care A here, it has been said before that when Care A goes missing, she goes missing forever. Paul then runs out of the room, trying to find the safest place to put the egg in, finding Tiara's locker. He then walks outside, and the game concludes in bright blue. I think the meanings behind all of this are really beautiful. The main thing I see is the series being against the idea of perfect children. The Stravinsky septet is supposedly the music meant for every child to be reborn to. Care's melody, which is the other song I could have played, is a song that demands Care to be exactly the child Marvin wants, not really treating her like a person, treating her more like a pet, interestingly enough. The result of the original rebirth was meant to be Care A, which I will repeat is a bit odd, considering it seems like the only time a rebirth like this has been tried out before failed horribly in Tiara. But what Paul's melody creates is an egg, which to me represents the beginning stage of a child's life. The machine here resets the child to their starting point so they can grow again. They are not going to be perfect. Paul putting the egg in Tiara's locker out of all places is also really adorable, as we now know these two are meant to be family. Tiara being Paul's older sister. There's also something I find really cute about the letter which Tiara had in her locker, that being that the letter was addressed to Tiara Leshkovitz. Tiara was seen as what would become of Belle if she was successfully reborn, but it would seem that Lena always saw Belle as a Tiara. The part after the Petscop soundtrack does also make for a pretty beautiful conclusion, as a sort of family reunion. Tiara saying to Paul, "We can investigate this together," which is a reference to one of the earliest things Paul has said to Tiara, all the way back in episode 2.
When you come home next month, and hopefully you're feeling a little more enthusiastic about that now, we can investigate this together.
It also has the meaning of it that this was also a moment where Tiara likely didn't actually come home. Also, do you remember when I said that the soundtrack ended with that piece of dialogue? I may have lied a little bit. They actually walk forward, finding a chair, with Lena sitting on it, with a little children's toy windmill in her hand. I keep getting fascinated by how conclusive this all feels, in spite of the fact that it could mean so many different things. Because we know the family got together. A real family, one who genuinely knows and cares for Paul, and gives him what Marvin and Anna couldn't give to Care. With that said, it leaves me with many questions, such as, are they still trapped in the game? This isn't a demo recording anymore. It would seem they have been fully consumed. Or perhaps they got out. And the game now just acts as a sort of extension of reality. It would be a bit more bittersweet if they stayed trapped in the game together, but I will just go with the idea that they did actually get out, and they can finally live together as the family that was meant to be. What can I say? I kind of like a happy ending. Especially in this series, I think after everything they've been through, Paul, Tiara, and Lena deserve peace in their life. With that said, I don't think everything around Petscop ends as happily as it could. For one, Mike is not coming back to life. But there actually is one story here which I haven't talked about yet, which makes it all feel a lot more bittersweet. It is another person who, similarly to Care, doesn't actually have their fate described in Petscop. Rainer. This is another thing which gets very subtly mentioned in a Petscop soundtrack, with track number 6, titled Bathroom Tomb. This song we haven't actually heard in the game, and it seems to be connected to Wavy and Randus' room. It's actually a pretty melancholic and beautiful song, relying only on a single synth. But I believe this song was actually played in the game, and I even have an idea of the exact time at which it was played. We saw places with the symbols of pretty much every room in Even Care on the Newmaker plane, from Amber to Ronith, even to the room between Penn and Randus, which I found out was actually a recreation of Mike's room, as he was a painter. But we only saw the cube with the symbol of Randus and Wavy very briefly, and have never found out what it has actually led to. We saw it in episode 11, above the bathtub, right before Paul walked into it.
That was an experience. Huh.
Here's what I believe happened, and what quite a few people in the community seem to agree on. Rainer killed himself in the bathtub. It would make sense. His creation was horribly misused and led to a ton of abuse. His little brother was dead, and his mission of making sure Care was safe was also finished. After giving the game to Lena, and also showing it to the family as his revenge, his life was finished. The dirt going down from the field where Randus grew is the dirt above his bathroom tomb. We also know that Care A's description said, "Check your bathroom now." Rainer probably wanted everyone to see what he did, so they couldn't hide away from it. I don't want to glorify this, as I don't believe it is the correct way to handle a situation, but I believe it is what happened, and in the context of Petscop and everything that's been done to the children in it, it actually feels somewhat tame. It also adds to the atmosphere that right as we walk into the bathroom the first time, we zoom in on the TV, presumably showing where the family was watching the game. So, Rainer is dead. Belle, Lena, and Paul have reunited. And though a game has been won, as strange as that feels to say with a game that you can never really win in, it has been finished. And that is my conclusion for Petscop. Well, we have finally made it through the entirety of Petscop. You have no idea how happy I am that I have made it here. I'm writing this part of the video after finishing the editing on all of the other episodes, and I am so glad that this is almost over now. Almost as glad as I am that I did it. You know, I'm really glad that I got to spend so much time and create something this huge in my spare time. But a lot of spare time has been invested. You know, and as with last time, I have evaded talking about this throughout the entire video, but if you have made it this far, it would mean a lot to me if you could share the video, subscribe, like, all that stuff. Let me know in the comments that you got something out of it, because that motivates me to make more. Admittedly, I'm sort of hoping that I won't be making more Petscop content in the near future, but if there is demand for it, I still could. Yeah, sharing is much appreciated, likes, all that stuff, you know. At the end of the day, I did this for myself. But I don't mind attention. With that said, we are now entering the sort of relaxed out and loosely scripted part of the video. I don't really have a script, I just have like a few notes of everything I should address. So this will be a bit more loose, a bit more chaotic, and it's basically a podcast episode that I'm sticking at the end of my already overtly long video. Before anything else, I would like to give my biggest thank you to 𝕔𝕠𝕟𝕚𝕚. I don't think I have spent this much time analyzing anything. The way I have talked about this a bit in episode 1, Petscop has in a way changed the way I look at my own art. I have been writing sort of amateurishly for a while now, and Petscop really has changed my way of writing and my way of seeing how worlds can be constructed or how mystery can be used. It has also helped me figure out my own identity in a way. It has been a lot of stuff to think about, and I find it absolutely amazing that somebody has managed to create something that has been so captivating for me. It is also worth mentioning that it has helped me captivated through the fact that for my original Petscop video, I have deleted about 40 pages of notes on accident. I have no idea if I mentioned this in a video before, but I did that, and somehow I still persisted with creating it. Which at the end of the day I'm sort of grateful for, because, you know, I don't want to talk about this too much, but I feel like I've progressed through my identity since those notes were taken in a way where I can now look at the series more honestly. And, you know, I also enjoy hearing my voice more now, so probably a better time to listen to it for months. While we're talking about this, because I am the way I am, I also feel the need to acknowledge that I have seen a few theories talking about Paul being trans as the main character of Petscop. And whilst it would sort of make sense, I don't believe it's true. Or I don't believe the theory makes sense. And I don't really want it to make sense. Because I think it's a coincidence. I understand that a girl reborn as a guy. I feel like 𝕔𝕠𝕟𝕚𝕚 has been very careful with how he wants the story to play out. And I somehow don't feel like a traumatized 6-year-old kidnapped by her dad needing to be put through some sort of a strange ritual to survive in a different body is an accurate depiction of trans people. I would also like to acknowledge a few things which I wasn't able to address in the video, because I feel like I've talked for a long time about things I understand and I have figured out in the video, but I need to acknowledge that a lot of Petscop will stay a mystery probably forever, because I don't believe the hints are there to figure it all out. I mean, I made it seem conclusive because I want my video to close out that way. And also because I do believe the series sort of closed itself out. However, I do feel like there are just many things that we don't really know much about. Like, what happened to Jill? She was so intimidating and predatory before. Where did she go, you know? And what really happened with Marvin? I have my theory that Paul walked into the room with the machine, with the green tool above his head, and he walked out of it without the tool. It sort of disappeared. Perhaps that tool represented Marvin? It's another thing I wanted to talk about, the tools. I feel like I maybe should have spent more time on the tools, I'm not sure. I don't really know what they mean. I feel like they had more meaning behind them that I didn't really dig into. I'm still not opposed to making like a Petscop update video in the future, just not in the near future. Another thing I would probably look into is the time theories and like the rotations. I've seen a video about that, it's pretty cool. I never really thought about it much, just because the clocks are confusing. But it is definitely something, I mean, you can look into if you want. I need to leave something out there to make people like watch the actual series, because it is kind of annoying how the videos theorizing about it do get so much more attention. Also, I've already talked about how you can let me know if you enjoyed Petscop and want me to talk about it a bit more. However, if there's anything else you would like to see me talk about, please let me know also. I do enjoy some recommendations. Not promising I will follow them or anything like that, because I talk about what I want to talk about, and I do have like a list of a few topics that I want to cover in the next few videos. And actually, I have a video prepared already, which I will be getting to right as this goes out. It is a video which I am planning on to be much shorter, and sort of, I want to experiment with it a bit more. Because if you haven't been paying attention to the visuals in this video, I do sort of repeat the same stuff. You know, I try to make a visual, like a few effects and a few sound effects and a few musics that I put in, because I mean, I do enjoy playing around with effects, but if you do it on a video this long, like, it is going to seem inconsistent. It is going to be very chaotic. And I don't really want that to happen. But with that next video, I'm hoping to keep it... Okay, here's my promise. Under 15 minutes. And I will try to make it as... how do you say this? Visually interesting as possible. Because it is about a very visually interesting artist. Also, if you have made it this far, I have a pretty big announcement, which I will be making a separate video on. But if you have made it here, I have been very excited to put this video out, not only because it is finally done, but also because I have told myself that after it, I am going to put out my own music. If you aren't aware or don't follow my other endeavors, you may not be aware of this, but I do have a music channel called 𝕔𝕠𝕟𝕔𝕚𝕦𝕤𝕚, where I put up various songs. I haven't really put much out there. There's just 2 songs. But I have an EP, 5 tracks plus an interlude. It's called Cycles, and it's going to be out on Spotify at some point after this video goes out, probably like a week or so. And also on SoundCloud. So, if you're on any of those platforms, like YouTube, which you're on right now, feel free to go to the description and subscribe to that stuff. Because, you know, I will talk about the music more in the separate video for it, but it is something that means a lot to me. And it does give a more sort of personal feeling. You know, the way I describe it is that, yes, I do produce, write, sing, and create everything for the music myself. And whilst that certainly does result in a few probably messy moments, it also is about as personal as it can get, you know? So that's my marketing strategy. So if I have convinced you, please go subscribe to 𝕔𝕠𝕟𝕚𝕚, There's going to be music dropping on there soon, as well as a music video whenever I get to doing that. And with that said, I think I'm all out of notes of what to talk about. One last thing I want to mention, which is about as random as it gets. There's a song called Forest by System of a Down, and I think it really well relates to the story of Rainer and Marvin. So if you want to look that up, please do, because the song is pretty amazing. I haven't recorded anything for a while. I recorded this video like months ago, and since then I haven't really spoken into a microphone, so I'm probably a bit awkward, but that's alright. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, hope you got something out of it. Once again, please let me know or share it if you enjoyed it, and goodbye. See you in the next one. Hopefully in around a month. That sounds doable to me. Goodbye.